Welcome back to the Invictus RPG Academy, Episode 3. Hello all, and welcome back to the Invictus RPG Academy, Episode 3. My name, of course, is Professor Harlan, and I am here with the scribe professor, Mr. Justin James. How are you this evening, Justin?
Cheerio, I'm doing quite well, thank you. And how are you?
Very good. The STI came back negative.
Negative.
Yes.
Negative means bad, isn't it?
I hope not. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Invictus RPG Academy. My name, of course, is Mr. Harlan Guthrie, and I am here with the lovely Thomas James. How are you doing tonight, Thomas? What's your new name?
Oh, well, I'm doing fine. The other guy he wasn't actually doing well. He was lying.
No,
that guy with the British dude.
He said cheerio. That's not even a real thing.
Cheerio? Who says that?
Who says that? That's such a fake thing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a series that we have done in the past called the Invictus RPG Academy. It is a series based around sharing our expertise, sharing our thoughts, opinions, and solutions to the various RPG problems that you might be having in your day-to-day. We have covered a variety of topics on the first 2 episodes of this series, such as game preparation, RPG etiquette, creating memorable NPCs, developing a campaign, writing mysteries, contingency planning, and building player characters. If you'd like to learn about any of those, please check out our previous 2 videos. We dive deep into those subjects, and that is not to say that they are completed by any means. There's constantly room for improvement, and we'll be touching on some of those ideas again at some point in the future. But tonight on the RPG Academy, we have a few new subjects to talk about. After polling you, the community, we have decided that tonight we're going to be talking about 3 to 4 subjects. Tonight we're going to be talking about the art of improvisation, mastering the game, which is going to focus on sort of fine-tuning those game master skills, bringing the new players to role-playing, meaning if you have friends or family that are interested in role-playing but haven't made the leap just yet, we're going to talk about how to sort of deal with that. And community game building. We're going to end tonight with building a little bit of a community game together, using the experiences and the suggestions that we've touched on in this episode already. So if you are interested in this sort of game night, welcome, and I hope you have some fun. Please join us in the Discord chat. We are going to be asking questions, looking for answers, and creating a bit of a feedback and forth between you guys tonight. It's going to be much different than our typical game night, and I'm really excited. How are you doing tonight, Justin?
I'm feeling good. I am excited. I'm seeing the Discord chat is bumping. We got Johnny Ray Reagan. We got Robert Baylor. We got Michael and Brianna and Colin Burkhardt. T-Man, Master of the Universe. Carly, Bjorn. Colin Burkhardt again. Then we
Colin
got
Burkhardt again. You get 2 shoutouts. That's right.
Chris
It's a very active community tonight. So if you're, if you have questions, there's going to be points as we're talking about subjects for you to jump in and give us your thoughts, and we're going to interact and read and go from there. Everybody excited?
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. I am excited.
Yes. I think
I would just like to point out.
Go ahead.
Oh please. One of the things. No.
No. Please.
Oh, cheerio. All right. Well, I wanted to point out that Harlan, will you stand up for a second? So look at Harlan and how nicely dressed he is.
What?
And I just want to point this out. Because you're not the only one.
Yeah.
You're not the only one.
Wearing these? Oh, you're actually wearing pants.
Well, they're sweats. Those are pants.
Well, these are pajama bottoms.
Yeah. Well, that's like, it would be classified as a pantaloon.
This is the mullet of the business world. Business on the top, party on the bottom.
That's right.
I was going to say,
you got to be comfortable.
One of the things we're going to have to touch on tonight during our first subject, which is the art of improvisation, while it is not improvisation per se, I think we should touch on accents. But we'll get into that in a second, because you and I both have a extensive... I don't want to say as ballsy as repertoire. Extensive...
Yeah.
difficulty.
Ambition.
That's a better way to put it. With accents. So yeah, we're going to touch on that in a second. Greetings, everybody. Justin's already listed a few of you. Nice to see the whole gang is out. Please, if you're watching this, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And if you like videos like this, make sure you let us know, because we can do these more often if there's something that you guys like to see.
JP Straight, 75,
JP Straight.
Jacob Watterson, Bird
I need
Nix.
assless chaps. That's just frustrating, because I don't have.
Do you need assless chaps, or
everyone needs assless
crave
chaps?
Assless chaps.
It's a little bit of both, if I'm being honest, and I often am. Yeah, so the RPG Academy, the Invictus RPG Academy, sort of started as an answer to some questions that you guys were asking, and we are continuing that tradition with these questions that you have asked, and I've sort of formulated them into subject headings so that we can better tackle the thoughts that you have. But if things come up while we're talking about these subjects, please let us know in the Discord chat. And and
we simply Googled improvising in RPGs, and we're just going to read it to you. It's like more of a Justin Reed stuff.
It's literally going to be that, plus Harlan commentates on it. No, but so let's start off. So we're going to start off with the first part of tonight, which is going to be talking about the art of improvisation. Is it an art, Justin?
Right. It is an art, and it's a very important art. Basically, with improvisation, it's all about structure. It's all about knowing what is going to happen, having those tools at your disposal, knowing that structure well, and then learning to play with it. So you might want to start off with like a G Mixolydian scale.
So you're talking about musical improvisation, which is very important to know for a musician.
Oh, did you mean a different kind of improvisation, Harlan?
Oh, my notes! So we do a lot of improvisation here on the Invictus stream. Obviously, I would say 75% of our games as of late have been improvised. Justin and I have both taken acting. Justin was in a improvisational troupe in high school called Theater Sports. You were part of that, weren't you? I thought so. Yep. So he's even one step above me. It's a big step too. But I've
rehearsed improvisation.
Yeah, and that's important. And some of the tools that will relate to our music actually will also relate to this. And there's a few sort of tips and tricks. So first and foremost, what is improvisation? Improvisation is sort of having the ability to run off the cuff. Give me an example, Justin.
Running off the cuff, it would be in this instant right now when Harlan said, give me something, I would say something clever or something interesting. But instead I'm just talking about saying those things.
I don't think it necessarily has to be clever or interesting. I think sometimes the better you get at it, the more clever and interesting you can be.
I agree. I think it's more just about going with the flow. And sometimes if you don't have an idea, it's best to just be real and say, I don't know, and play off of that. Kind of like I just did there.
Yeah, you did. Exactly. And it gave me the opportunity to carry the conversation in a different direction. So one of the tenements of improvisation, and this is especially true in role-playing, is to say yes. Oftentimes, one of the biggest issues that you come across that will halt a scene, or in this case, well, I guess it's still a scene in RPGs, is when someone says no. So if you are especially doing, a character introduction or a one-shot, which is more often than not where we tend to improvise the most here on the Invictus stream, saying no is a real scene ender early on. For instance, if I'm walking down the street in character and I'm trying to hand it back and forth, I think we just did this in the last game, where we were riffing about, it was Joe's dungeon crawler, and we were talking about our previous mission, remember? And I had said, well, we stole the jewels, or something like that. Now, Justin very easily could have been like, no, it wasn't jewels, it was gold. or something like that. But rather than shoot me down, you took it and then you added to it. Do you remember? I can't remember exactly what you said.
No, I don't remember either. It's just all a blur to me. But yeah, I do remember taking it and running with it and saying like, yeah, and then this happened because of that and that.
Exactly. And that rapport that Justin and I have comes naturally because we've spent a long time role playing together. But it can work with anybody. If you're sitting around the table at a convention and you know, the person next to you turns to you and says, "Oh, you know," and you caused a difficulty. Prime example in the last game when we decided we were brothers. I can't remember who did it, but one of us turned to the other and was just like, "Well, it's because he's my brother." Again, very easy to be like, well, no, that doesn't work in line with my character concept, or you know, how are we exactly brothers, and halting the action. But sort of the core tenements of improvisation is to say yes, to let the sort of idea that the other person is presenting flow.
Say yes and figure it out. Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if we're ready to jump into this yet, but I think that there are certain systems that play better towards improvisation than others, where it's easier to improvise. Like I would say the Strange is a very easy system to improvise because pretty much anything can happen in the Strange.
Yes.
But that is another aspect as well. And what I said when I was talking about the G Mixolydian scale and I was talking about structure, that is actually worth note because generally when you're improvising, you want to give a sense of structure about the world and how it works. So most improv, if you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, it's set in the real world where like, you know, you don't need to really establish that this world is different. But RPGs, that's going to be different every time. So you have to create an understanding of, say it's with your backstory, of this is the baseline for this world that I've created in my backstory, and then you can go from there.
It's a really good point, actually, because oftentimes you think, okay, well, improv means that anything happens, and you're walking, you know, in the same scenario down the street, and we're talking about a job that we had done. In one scenario, I can say, you know, you should have returned those jewels, Justin, and Justin can respond with something in kind about, you know, he pulls the jewel from his pocket and flicks it and sort of regards it and plays with what I'm setting. Equally, to go overboard and say, you know, we shouldn't have flown to Egypt last night. I'm on a 10-hour, you know, bender being hung over. Sometimes you go too wide, and I think that's what Justin's saying with the Strange being such a vast array. If you cast too wide a net and you just start throwing things out, it becomes confusing. That is to say, improv for the sake of improv isn't helpful. And that's sort of the second tenement of improvisation. Saying yes, but also contributing to the scene. It's not about using what you have as a platform to be zany, because, you know, if he does play along with that and says, oh yeah, that flight from Egypt was long. And then I say, yeah, but, you know, I'm a millionaire, so it's fine. And then him being like, yeah, you are. Being a millionaire must be so great. And you're like, yeah, as well as being a superhero. I'm really lucky. Like, it's just sort of... There's sort of
at that point, I'd probably turn to another character and say, has he taken his meds today?
Exactly. Right? And that can work too, because that's also something that, from an improvisational standpoint, that I can then build on too and sort of then play up that zaniness. But contributing to the scene is also one of those core tenements. If you set the stage with two characters, let's stop saying walking down the street, let's say going through a haunted house.
The very same scene every time.
Yeah, just like... but if you were saying two characters exploring a haunted house, you know, in improv, it's sort of assumed that that's the setting and that's the scene, and you're contributing to that scene, meaning you're trying to add tension or add, you know, oh, I turn to the dresser and I open the dresser and you know, behind it bats fly out. You're contributing to the scene. Whereas if you're like, I leave the mansion and I go across the street and I get into my car and I start driving. And it's funny how often, especially like playing with other people that aren't too familiar with improvisation, how often that actually comes up. I don't know if you've actually experienced this. Have you?
Where someone just like decides to not see the adventure at all?
Yeah,
follow it at all?
they're really good at saying yes and including something, but they're not great at contributing to the scene. And I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah, I mean, you can just say yes, but you're putting a lot of weight on the other person to add to it and build, because it's kind of like a conversation. Like a conversation for most people won't go anywhere if you don't give anything back. Like you can't just say, oh, I do know some people who can make a conversation last very long with that. But you have to be able to have that back and forth. And I've definitely played with players who just will say, oh yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea. Oh, okay. And in that situation, I will sometimes try to get them to, like, I'll give them more opportunities to take the lead.
Because they're
and
not
say, like,
being...
Exactly. Like,
they're not feeling,
okay,
for whatever reason, they're not feeling like they have enough of a say in the scene, so they're trying to sort of force the camera back on them.
Sometimes it's just shyness. Sometimes it's feeling like what they're going to contribute may not make sense, or may not be clever or the right idea, which is kind of another ballpark that we could go into.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about new players, and that's shyness. Bird of Nick's asked a really good question about shyness, and I'm going to tack it into when we talk about bringing in new players, because I think more often than not, new players are very shy. And that's a great question, Bird. And if you have any questions like that, please let us know, because we're happy to address them. But yes, contributing to a scene, meaning that you want to keep with the flow of what you are improvising. You want to build on it. You don't want to tear it down. And I think sometimes it's difficult to understand where the scene is heading. For instance, in this regard, we're talking about improvisation from a player-to-player standpoint, but what about improvisation from a player-to-GM standpoint? And I think with us, because we have a really experienced group that we play with, you know, there's nothing wrong with having a game that we're playing that Joe's running or something, and me saying, oh, I turned to the cabinet in the room. I don't need to say, is there a cabinet in the room? Because we have a rapport where she knows that I'm improvising to improve the scene. And oftentimes that's a problem when you're trying to, you know, if you're playing with a new GM, or you're trying to tell a story, or even as a GM, if a player is trying to do that, there can be a bit of tension. And I think putting the story aside, putting your vision for the tale aside, improvisation on that level is something that needs to be practiced, and the more you practice it, the more comfortable you're going to get with the people that you're doing it with. And I think, especially between you and I, there's really no major limit, so long as I've adequately described the intention of the scene or the feel of the scene. I don't think you and I have ever come to a point where, you know, you're throwing something in there that's totally out of whack.
Yeah, I think that we've gotten to a point, and we've played together for so long, that I can pick up on subtle cues from you, and you do a really good job of expressing the tone of the scene. So first of all, I mean, if we're playing Call of Cthulhu, I'm going to know that, you know, I'm not going to be coming up with zany shit for the scenes. Like, that automatically will give me a sense of the structure of the world, you know, the limits of the world that I can, you know, create. So there's a level of trust, I think it is, because you don't want your players to just be like, okay, well, I go to the chest in the corner of the room and open it and find a magic sword of +5.
Exactly.
Like, that obviously is too far. So it's partially definitely practice, but I think it's also building trust from GM to players, so that you know that, okay, this player isn't going to try to just change the scene just for their character's benefit. They're looking to make a good story with me, so I can give them a little bit more freedom in that way.
Exactly. And I agree. You have to be able to feel that tone. And sometimes that's on the responsibility of the GM. Sometimes that's on the responsibility of the player. I have definitely played games of Call of Cthulhu where the players are in a different mindset and they want it to be zanier, you know. And I've definitely been in that same mindset where I'm trying to make it zanier and they're feeling very sullen. And sometimes that's okay. I mean, don't get me wrong. When you're trying to create a scene, sometimes an infusion of humor can be really good, and it comes down to also reading the room, but and reading the players that you're with. But generally, again, to reiterate the first two so far, saying yes, and I think the technical is yes and or no but. You always want to offer solutions, meaning that if Justin says something, yes and this, no but this. That's the improvisation sort of main tenement. With role playing, it's a little different, because if you keep saying yes and, you know, with improv in its classic sense, you're trying to craft a singular scene, and at the end of it, you're done. Which is why tacking on more and more is always really attractive, and it's funny and it's zany. It's a bit different with role-playing that I've felt, that you don't necessarily always want to be adding. It's sometimes okay to let people take the lead.
Exactly, yeah. And actually with that, I guess, advanced class, sometimes it is okay to say no, and sometimes, like, you can create really fun shticks. If you know that, like, a character might say, like, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna steal that purse over there, I'm gonna go steal it, and you know that this character is saying that, this other player is saying that because
hoping for the other person to stop them.
They're hoping for the yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you do have to build that rapport and trust, because if there's no one there to say no to you, if they don't pick up on that cue, then you might just be putting yourself in a shitty situation where you have to steal someone's purse or find an excuse not to. But
definitely, and not everyone's going to improvise the same way that you want to, and sometimes that's a fair thing to sit down before you play and say, okay, you know, I'm going to play a character that's a bit brash, don't feel afraid to hold him back or her back. So yeah, those are two of the main points. The third one that I always try to keep in mind when we're doing role-playing, improvisation role-playing, is moving forward. It's really easy to offer suggestions. It's really easy to contribute to that scene, but we always have to be in the mindset of, are we pushing this? You know, it's and we fall into this pit hole sometimes too, where we get locked in on a zany interaction and we forget about the actual pacing. And this is a lot different than classic role playing as well. In improv I should say, in improv you can spend some time in the scene because you know someone's going to end it, or you know there's going to be a point, which will be the next tenet of improv role playing. But when it comes to this, you're still playing a game. You always want to be mindful of what you're moving towards. Meaning, if again we're walking down the street or exploring a haunted house, it's great that we're in that front hall doing a zany bit, that I'm talking about Jules and talking about the last job, and that we're contributing to the scene. But we want to be mindful of the fact that we're still moving in a direction that the GM has sort of laid out for us. Yeah, I think this is what we fall in the hole of most often.
I think so, but I mean, we love it. We really enjoy, you know, that back and forth. I think that when it becomes a problem is when the GM doesn't move things along. That's part of, I think, the GM's role, because the players are going to have fun, like, interacting, but it can be a disservice to themselves if they do it too much, because eventually they're going to start to feel bored. Definitely. So if the GM doesn't jump in and just say, okay, all right, we're going to move forward with this now, like, okay, all right, like Joe would say, okay, guys, like, or something of that, like.
I think there's a balance, because you're right. There's definitely times where the GM can be pushing us forward. At the same time, you know, the experience of role-playing is one that you are meant to encapsulate a character. That character's motivations are usually clearly laid out at the beginning, i.e. explore this haunted house. If you're not being cognizant of your character's motivations, then you have to make sure, you know, you have to take a step back and really remind yourself that you're meant to be this character. And I think this is something that I personally need to work on at times, because I can get lost in a scene, I can get zany, and the GM can push us along sometimes when we get stuck, but ultimately the story and the way it unfolds is technically on my shoulders. That's not to say it's not the GM's responsibility. Absolutely. Pacing is going to be a whole issue that we talk about in mastering the game. But more often than not, we are the driving force behind what is going to happen and when. And it's important to be mindful of that, because I think otherwise you get stuck in sort of this loop where all you're doing is acting without really serving the purpose of the game.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the art. This is an art as well, is finding that balance.
The art of balance.
Beautiful.
So we have saying yes, we have contributing to the scene, we have moving it forward, and then finally I would say one of the final tenements. Am I using that word right? Tenements?
I think it's tenets. Tenets. Yeah.
You know
tenets.
what? I was just talking about this the other day, because I was like, tenements, right? And they're like, tenements isn't a word. And I was like, oh, that's right. And somehow I forgot. Tenants.
Tenet.
Right?
Tenet. Tenants are people who live in your house.
Tenets. So one of the final points, one of the final points of the art of improvisation is being able to say the right word. No, is knowing when to end or to change the scene. Again, this moves in line. It works with moving forward, but it's more so about finding the conclusion. And this works for GMs and players alike. Oftentimes, as a game time begins winding down, we have the opportunity of knowing we have a fixed 3-hour schedule. At a convention, you have that benefit too. But if you're playing around the table, it's difficult to know when a conclusion comes. And I sort of use this as the George Costanza principle from Seinfeld, who decided at one point in the show to always leave on a joke, always leave at a high point. And I think a great skill of improvisation and role-playing is to leave when the humor and the scene is sometimes at its peak, where it's not going to get any higher. And if we were playing around the table, it would be a lot tougher to sometimes judge, but oftentimes sort of reading the room and talking with your players and looking around. I think we've all been there. Even us, for ending in 3 hours, we know generally when we're at, but when the game ends, we're all looking to each other. We're all kind of like, many times, I can't count the number of times we've messaged each other on chat around 11 o'clock and said, okay, we're going to end on this scene. And then give the players an idea to be like, and then there was none.
Right.
And scene, you know what I mean? Finding that conclusion, especially when you're telling a story, not just a scene, but a story, is so important. It's so easy to sort of overdo it, to say, okay, and then you walk out of the building. And then you head to your car and you drive home. And that night you sleep soundly. And when you get up the next day, you feel great, and you had a good time, and that's the end. And you had 2 great opportunities to end the game, but you decided to not shut up. So,
yeah, you develop a bit of a sense. Again, like you start to get a feel for when things are wrapping up, and people start to give out cues too. And sometimes it's the
Joe
players.
Starts yawning.
That's right. Yeah. Like you start to like Harlan was just doing there, and that's actually a technique in narrating. Like I always, when a chapter is coming to an end, I always try to frame at least that last paragraph in a way that I'm cueing the listener to be ready for it. And some authors don't actually cue it themselves. Some authors, the chapter ends abruptly, and it's kind of irksome. But doing that with your voice and starting to slow things down, as Harlan was doing in that scene, can be a great way to end a scene. And then somebody else, you're probably going to have that person at the table who's going to just say that one last line. And that's happened a few times for us.
Oh, and it ruins it. And you're like, oh, it's always you. No, you know what? It's always Alex. It's always Alex being like... no, but it's true, and knowing when someone else is going to stop, it's a bit of a gamble at times. Sometimes it is just trying to read the face and sort of the mind of someone else that you're playing with. But sometimes it's as easy as just saying, like, kind of like, oh, we're going to end on this scene, and blah 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 blah. We try to do it a bit different because we are putting on a show. and we're trying to seam together. But if we weren't live, I would just be like, okay, we're going to end on this scene. Tell me the finality of what happens. So yeah.
So that was I guess ending the scene well, or what's the actual
finding the conclusion.
Finding the conclusion. Yes.
Yeah.
If we're done on that point, I wanted to bring one more thing up, I guess.
Please do.
Talk about when to focus on improvisation and when to not, like while you're playing. I think with role-playing games, there are certain opportunities, but sometimes being too improvisatory would be kind of a detriment to the scene. It wouldn't really work well.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you would say on that?
Definitely. And sort of on that note, some other issues that might come up with improv and things like that. But when to improvise and when not to. First and foremost, games, RPGs typically have an ebb and flow between combat and sort of the role-playing aspects. I think we all know that those are the two sort of pieces to a good role-playing puzzle, and the puzzles being the third. I mean, it's funny, and it's almost subtle, but anyone who watches us will know that the GM will give very obvious hints, sometimes blatantly just stating, okay, you guys talk amongst yourselves for a bit when it's time to improvise. Some of the more subtle ways we've done it are when you're interacting with an NPC and saying, you know, you can say anything you want to this NPC, or this person's willing to talk for a bit. You know, using sort of subtle clues to let you kind of riff a little bit on that. Most often, you know, Jo, when GMing, I mentioned because she's been GMing a lot lately, will kind of just say, you know, who are we looking at? Or like, what are you guys doing? And she'll throw it to us. Describe this scene. Show us what the path looks like. Describe the house. All of these are ways the GM has told you to improvise. Beyond that, I think as a player, it's our responsibility to not step on the GM's toes. But so long as the scene is not overtly being described to us, okay, the house looks like this, I think it's always fair to test the waters and to try. I mean, there's nothing wrong with even asking. If I was at a convention and we were coming up to the house and the GM wasn't really describing it very, very well, and it was more of a descriptive improvisation that we were playing with, and they were like, hey, you come up to the house, and I was like, well, what does it look like? And they'd be like, I'm not too sure. If they're not a seasoned GM, I'd be like, is it okay if I describe it? If they are, they'd probably be like, tell me what it looks like. Improvisation is about sort of boundary testing in this regard, in a good way. It's always okay to put on more than to sort of under-describe, and especially when it comes to your character, which I think most people are comfortable with. But I don't know. How do you feel about it?
I feel the same way. I feel like combat, especially, like sometimes improvising in combat, like you are improvising the whole time. When you are playing an RPG, you are. Sometimes with combat, adding a little bit too much color and too much flair can slow down the pace of the combat, which
it not only can slow. I mean, Jacob Watterson asked a great question. He said, what do you feel are the biggest issues with combat improv on both sides? And I think that's what you're getting at, Justin. And not only, I would go so far as to say, not only does it slow down combat sometimes, but it can really confuse someone, especially a GM, if you're being really descriptive. Like, you know, in D&D, if you want to jump on the table and then jump off and elbow the guy, you know, is that a grapple? Is that a hit? I mean, mechanically speaking, you can get into a bit of a nightmare on trying to quantify exactly what you're trying to do.
But at the same time, like some characters thrive on that. Like having a high acrobatics character who likes to jump and leap off of things and twist and bend, and it's kind of the joy of it to, you know, describe how it is that they're doing that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the ways around that is to figure out what you want to do at the end. So let's say you wanted to elbow someone or grapple someone. I think you say to the GM, I'm going to grapple, you roll for it, and then you describe in any manner of ways how you want that to happen. The problem is with this idea of improvisation during combat is so many of these games are mechanically inclined And they matter, you know, especially if you're playing something like Adventurers League, where if your character dies, they die. You want to make sure that you're doing things in a very strict way. Now, you started off this part by talking about systems that lend themselves well to improvisation. And in a narrative sense, The Strange is a great example. In a mechanical sense, I think Feng Shui, as well as the Wushu combat system that we used a few times, are great examples of improvisational combat. You know, Wushu is a system where you just roll one die for whomever is on screen. Rather than make these enemies difficult with combat points and all that kind of stuff, you just make more enemies that basically exist or die within a single die roll. And regardless of how you kill them, if you succeed, whether it be gun or punching or throwing a plate at them, you kill them. It's that easy. And I like that take to improvise combat personally, because I've never been too much of a crunchy person when it comes to that.
Yeah. Well, and like, just to touch on what you were saying earlier, I think it was Joe who really drove that home for us, of like, don't describe what you're doing first. Like, we would all be like, okay, like, I'm gonna jump, I'm gonna punch her in the face.
She's like, well, roll, like, okay, and then see roll if you
first. Do that. yeah, and she was kind of adamant about it at first, and I totally see why, because it takes kind of the wind out of your sails if you roll badly. But that bad experience of like getting a bad roll and missing can still turn into a fun one when you're like, oh, I really botched that. I rolled a -1. And the GM trusts you enough to say, okay, what happens with your -1? Oh, I drop my weapon, it slides into the mud or whatever.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating. For both the GM and the players. If you're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and the GM's like, okay, well, let's see if you actually do anything first. And you just wasted a minute explaining what you're going to do, and you fail your roll, and it could have been someone else's turn. You know what I mean? Like, that can be frustrating.
It can be.
So yeah, that's a good question. In the realm of improv, there are a few other sort of tips that we'd like to give you. One of them is, and it goes to what we were saying at the beginning about contributing to a scene, and oftentimes people who are improvising outside of contributing to the scene are doing it because maybe they don't feel like they have enough spotlight. And I think it's important to allow other players to have that ability to improvise as well, encouraging them. And sometimes it's on the shoulders of someone who might be a little bit more seasoned to encourage the other people at the table to improvise. I think it's easy to get really caught up. I mean, we're all seasoned on the Invictus stream, so I don't give a shit about giving you spotlight, Joseph. I don't take it all. No, but you know,
I gotta take that damn spotlight.
Exactly. But if you're at a convention and you're playing next to somebody who's never played before, and you're well done, use that to encourage their improvisation. The GM should be doing it, but you as a player can have responsibility in making someone have a better time as well. So spotlight is tough like that.
I think also interacting directly with people, with other characters, and I guess like you're saying, leading by example too. Like, I know we don't really have a problem with this, but especially at conventions and playing with new people, like if you see someone who's like quiet around the table, I think that like turning to them and saying, like in character even, like, how do you think that we should solve this? Like, do we do this? Like, and it could be an aside, like maybe it's a combat encounter where somebody else is rolling. Yeah. So you're not putting them in the spotlight if they're shy about that, but just inviting them to try it, maybe even just on a private level, just with you first.
Absolutely.
Can make a greater experience for them.
No, you're so right. And I mean, there's been a few times at conventions where I've played with new players, and I remember, one of the girls that we're playing the End of the World game with, I think the one that Carly was in, actually. What was her name? Carly might remember. Lee? Something? I think maybe it was Lee. I don't know. It was the game that Chris and Joe was in. But I think there was a point there at the beginning where she was like, sort of tentatively being like, can I grab a what are they called? Stanchion? What are those called?
Oh, falchion?
No, those like rope holder things.
Oh, is it a stanchion? Maybe it's
I
a
don't
stanchion.
remember
That sounds
anymore.
familiar.
V, that's it. I thought it was Lee. V, close enough. I'm pretty sure it was her. It might have been a different game. But where she was like, can I grab one of these? And I was like, of fucking course you can. It's a role-playing game. I was like, anything you want, you do. And then I think she got excited after that. She was like, okay. And then sort of got into this idea of like, oh, like anything can happen. And sometimes it's as easy as like waiting for someone to ask you and letting them know how open they are to do it. And excitedly so. I think sometimes in a case like that, being excited about it can be a good motivator for other people to want to be as into it as they can. Carly will vouch. Maybe I totally made that up. Maybe I'm lying. I honestly can't remember now. So that's a tip. Sorry, go ahead.
Being enthusiastic. Actually, that is a great tip for improvisation, right? Like
that's a great
really,
tip
like
for life.
In general, just smile. Just
be a
you know,
nice
act like
person.
you're having a good time. Yeah.
Why do do you really think every game that I start off going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and we're live, I'm like happy to do it? No. And that actually we'll touch on later because Bob Lyle asked a great question about that. And I think I'm going to tuck that under mastering the game. Anyway,
Tuck that under mastering the game.
yeah, because it's a good idea.
Cool.
One of the other, so some of the other tips that I think are important with improvisation, and this is more from a GM standpoint, would be to have a strong setting with many options, never too finite or boring. That's not to say you can't do it, but I think it's unfair to expect someone to improvise when you give them very little material to do it with. You know, if you're like, okay, you're in an elevator. It's like, all right, well, like, is there anything in the elevator? No. Am I in the elevator with anybody? No. Do I have anything on me? No. You're wearing scrubs.
Is there a panel that I can open in the ceiling?
Yeah, and they're like, no. You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes the GM is doing this for a specific reason or whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But I have equally heard GMs tell stories where it's like, oh, you know, I had to put my players in a car driving to a hotel, you know, and they were just like sitting there waiting for me to move the scene along. It's like, what? They're in a fucking car. Like, what do you want them to do? Like, shoot the driver and pull over to the side of the road? Like, you got to give some people some, and if you're not, you know, if you're really set on doing a specific intro that doesn't have much excitement, but you want them to improvise, then throw something in there. Maybe a deer runs across the road, which we've done on. Is that why you're laughing? October lull?
No, I'm just smiling because of enthusiasm. But this definitely bleeds into the. No, I'm just kidding. I'm interested. It bleeds into the mastering the game, I think.
Oh, I got a few more tips for improvise first.
Yes. Let's hear them. I'm gonna.
Yeah. Well, no, it's only because I don't know who, but someone goes through these videos afterwards and timestamps all of the beautiful things. So I'm so happy to whomever does that. So thank you. You win MVP all 3 times today. Sincerely, I'll give you all 3. But anyway, so yeah, having a strong setting as a GM is really, really, it gives think of it this way. If you want someone to paint a really unique and glorious picture, but you give them a canvas that has a picture half painted on it, and you only give them the color yellow to paint with, you're going to get a pretty specific picture. If you give them a blank canvas with maybe an outline at most, you're going to get a much more diverse picture. At the very least, the players are going to feel like they put more of themselves on the canvas. So take that to heart. Finally, my last tip when it comes to improvisation, and I think this is something that a few systems do really well, but I've seen GMs do it equally well, is to encourage improvisation or exploration through reward. One of the best tools that any system has, including D&D, is inspiration points or XP. Something that you can gift as a way to say, hey, that idea you just had, that interaction you just had, that improv you just did was great. Here. And as a GM, it's your choice on what you want to reward it. If you want a game to have more life, more enthusiasm, more improv in it, reward those who do improv. Even if they're being self-serving, even if someone introduces themselves as a zany character and they jump up on a log and they cut through some tiny bushes and they're a tiny little hobbit person or whatever, and they're a funny, zany character that add something, and you know, they're adding to the scene and they're adding to the characters. Give them inspiration for it. It's a mythical substance anyway. You're not losing anything by it, and it makes them feel good, and it makes other players say, hey, you know what? If I want something similar, maybe I should try being a little bit more improvisational as well. That's an important thing to remember as a GM, that you ultimately control the reward for what people are doing. So that's it for my tips for improv. Anything else to add, Justin? Any other tips that popped into your mind?
Any other tips for improv? No, not really tips, but again, I noticed someone mentioned 10 candles as being a big test in improv. And we played that game once at your place.
We did.
And it is really interesting. I would say, actually, so in terms of improv, if you were to rate like the top 3 games for improv, what would you recommend for like improving
systems?
Yes.
You know, it's tough because we don't really do systems the way that they're supposed to be.
Yeah,
but I would
mean,
say
we get the general.
Yeah, I would say the way that we've done improv, at least in my own sense.
Yeah.
Maybe Don't Walk in Winter Wood. That was a pretty heavy one.
Okay. Well, that's based on not for our games. I mean for like systems. So that would have been End of the World.
No, that was its own system, Don't Walk in Winter Wood. End of the World would be a great improv system though. Definitely. Yeah. Especially because you'd feel comfortable being your own contributor. But I'm not sure. I have to think about it. What do you think? What are some systems that to you jumped out?
Well, there are certain elements, like you were mentioning the inspiration points. I really like Star Wars and the whole Genesis system for that advantage, disadvantage. I guess that's what they're called, or despair, threat, sort of system where you roll and you get you get whether or not it succeeds, but with a disadvantage, or whether it succeeds with a advantage.
You know what? You're right, because that mechanically forces you to be more improvisational.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives you everybody at the table opportunities to try improvising in a combat setting too.
Yeah, I'm of two minds on this, because my only sort of hesitation with that system is I remember feeling almost like, I got to think of something else. Remember that? I remember being like, we got to, like, forced improv to an extent. I mean, it's not bad, but I think it was the amount.
Too structured.
Yeah, it was too structured, where it's like, at the point we were sort of just throwing things out there because it was just coming up so much. It's like, okay, well, we hacked another door, let's throw in another bonus here. But I agree with what you're saying, where mechanical sort of forced improv things can be really good. And I think Don't Walk in Winter Wood had something like that, didn't they? That's why. Like, you got something from doing improv.
Oh, Don't Walk in Winter Wood. I was thinking of The Longest Night.
Oh, no. The one where you guys each had a section of story to tell. Remember? Like, I remember Jo telling that story because she was a midwife, of like going over the grave of the baby and like remembering the time that she was. Did you play that game with us? Maybe you didn't, actually.
Yes, I did. It was,
okay,
it was me, Jo, and
was Chris there? Or Alex? I think it was Alex.
It was Alex. Yeah, it was Alex.
Yeah.
He was the butcher or something.
But yeah, I mean, it is tough, because I think, especially with us, the systems can be a bit blurred.
I guess the best answer really is, it can be any system, but like as far as setting goes, whichever one you are the most excited, passionate, interested, know the most about, that will make it easier. Because the more you know about the world, the more colors you have to paint with.
Definitely.
I would say.
Yeah, because I remember one of the drawbacks for Star Wars 2 was just, I didn't know the world that much. And it was like, I couldn't say a blank creature walks into the bar because I don't know what the fuck a blank would be. Although, now that I'm thinking, as much as they irk me, I do think the XP system for the Monty Cook games work really well. And the reason being is, I think one of the best uses of improvisation in their game is when you get a natural one, when you fail, and you have a GM intrusion. because GM intrusions are really basically improv. You have to know whatever the hell is going on in the scene, and the GM will be like, okay, well, so you know what? That's an example of forced improv that I think actually is quite good.
Right, because it's a good dosage of forced improv.
It's not too often. Yeah.
Yeah, but the GM intrusions, the only thing I don't like about it, because I'm always a player, is that you don't get XP for it.
That's true. Yeah,
you don't get it if you roll a 1. Like if you they can introduce a GM intrusion whenever they want, and that's how you get XP. But if you wanted to, you could play it so that if you roll a 1, you get XP.
You could, but you'd be cheating. So there you go. So there's a brief look at the art of improvisation. Again, something that we do a lot on the Invictus stream. Again, to reiterate the points, the first would be saying yes. Make sure you always say yes to people who are offering something to you. If someone is trying to bring the scene in a different way, there's nothing wrong with seeing where it goes. You can always move back to where you originally were. The second, contribute to the scene. Make sure that whatever you're trying to add is something that is building the scene that the GM is trying to create, whether it be a horror setting or a comedy setting. Make sure you're contributing to the overall feel of the scene. 3, make sure you're always trying to move it forwards. Well, I shouldn't say always, because there are plenty of times that you can simply just enjoy the scene and say yes, but always have in the back of your mind that moving the scene forward is the intention of the game. And finally, always look for the conclusion. Especially near the end of the game, the conclusion sometimes is the best point in which to end it, the peak of the comedy. And we've had a few games that have ended in the perfect way. I think Nigerian Prince email scam ended in a really good way. Every once in a while, we'll end a game on sort of a joke or something that just sort of is said at the perfect time, and we'll just be able to end it right there. So find that conclusion. And there are your sort of 4 good points or tenets or David tenets for the art of improvisation. Hope you enjoyed that. Next, we are talking about mastering the game. What does mastering the game mean? Well, it's sort of a nice way of saying getting better at being a game master. What is a game master? A game master is the person who is creating the world, learning the rules system for the most part, and telling you the story and what you're doing. I shouldn't say telling you the story, giving you the setting and helping you create the story. What does being a game master mean to you, Justin?
Being in control of your friends. No, being the game master to me is, I'm not entirely sure. I kind of came back in when you were wrapping up there, but to me, it's being a facilitator of, first of all, fun. Second of all, telling a story. And third of all, I need to have a third because you need to do things in 3.
That's just me. I always do everything in 3s.
Yeah, maybe I just model off of you. Maybe that's what it is.
And 3, you model off of me.
Yeah, just to model off of Harlan. Just to be more like Harlan, be a GM. So, but definitely those first 2, I would say, are the most important things. Is making sure everybody's having fun, and B, telling a damn good story.
A damn good story, and helping your players tell that story too. Oftentimes, we'll start off with the intention of telling a story one way, and the players will totally sidetrack and ends up being better than we ever could have hoped. So, yeah. Because mastering the game is such a vast and diverse topic, what we've decided is to focus on a few points to talk about. I mean, these are things that you, the community, have had issues with. They're also things we personally had issues with, and things that we want to talk about and address to hopefully give you a bit of an idea of how to combat them yourself. So, first under mastering the game is managing time. One of the biggest issues we encounter as GMs is working within time constraints. We work within a window every Wednesday of about 3 hours. Sometimes we end early, but for the most part, we end when we're meant to and start pretty much when we're meant to. Mm-hmm. That is a skill that I have not given us fair appreciation for, I feel, because that is pretty tough.
Yeah, it is. We get things wrapped up generally pretty well by the end of the 3 hours by now.
And,
or, or even the long form of like a 10-session campaign.
Oh, definitely.
Usually it wraps up.
Absolutely. And I think for us, it's unique because we're always between the hours of 8 and 11. It's funny because at times we've sort of toyed with the idea of changing the times, but my mind is so geared around those 3 hours that when I look at the clock and I see that it's 9 o'clock, I know how I'm doing. When I see 9:30, when I see 10:20, those numbers are very reminiscent to me. They connect with me, and I'm like, okay, I kind of know how long I have to do whatever I'm doing based on those specific 3 hours. So changing would be very difficult. But yeah, time constraints are difficult. I would say when you're playing with friends, it's not so much of an issue, but a few people were posting about the time issues that they were having. And I know from my own experience of playing in conventions, it can be very difficult when you're playing with new people or different people, trying to work within those time constraints. When you ran a game at Chronicle, how did you do? You went way under, right? Or way over?
I think I went a little over.
Yeah.
I think mine ended last, but I think you guys were... No, mine went perfect. Mine was exactly the length of time that it was supposed to be. I think you guys ended early.
Right.
Chris definitely ended early.
Yes. And those are things that as a GM you sort of get better at understanding and all that kind of stuff. And some of the tips that we have for doing that, at least my tips, would be first and foremost, as I said, be mindful of the clock. Obviously, if you know the time that you need to end, check it. Make sure that you are looking at the clock to remind yourself of sort of what the next step needs to be. A lot of times we get lost in role playing. I think the first time I ran a game around the table for people at TAG, I spent maybe an hour and a half doing character creation and then an hour and a half in the game, and was just terrible at pushing them forward, and they got barely anywhere in the game. It was my Call of Cthulhu adventure, and they got barely out of the morgue when the game ended, and I was like, okay, well, you missed 90% of this game. And it was my fault as a GM.
Well, I want to just color that for a little bit, because I think it's really good that you're saying that, because I think a lot of people, when they look at you, Harlan, like when they see like all of the games that you've run, they just, they just turn and run. No, they see like how confident you are and how good you are at running games. I think it's good for people to know that you're still learning too. Like, this isn't something that we've mastered or necessarily know how to do with every group of players we're ever going to play with.
Oh, totally. I
fail
fail constantly.
Yes. So everybody feel good, have solace, and know you're not alone. Harlan fails too. Now me, on the other hand,
he's perfect. No, you're right, and absolutely. I think it's funny because I think when I got around a table, it almost did the opposite for me. We work on such a schedule of 3 hours, and such a tight schedule at that, to make sure we break around this time, we start around this time, blah, blah, blah. That when I finally got in front of players at a table, I was like, I can finally take my time. I can finally enjoy this. I can build tension. And before I knew it, I was like, okay, that's our time. So I think my biggest fault was just not realizing at all that it still means you have to continue pushing the clock.
Yes, and this is something that like you learn from experience. Like, I definitely know the first games that I started running, God, the combat encounters that this was like back when I was in university. Like, I would run games and I'm thinking like, oh, we're gonna get through this, and then we get to the first combat encounter and it would take an hour and a half to 2 hours, just that combat. And like, the only way that I was able to learn that combat bogs things down is just to learn that mistake, or learn that over and over and over again, and realize, wow, okay, I'm gonna have to shape my combat differently.
And that's so true, and that's something that you definitely have more experience of, because you started role playing well before me, and sort of getting to be around the table and sort of seeing how long those things take. And even now, when I went down to Buffalo and played with our friends and fans here, you know, they missed a chunk of the story as well, based on my failures as a GM as well. My absolute failure.
Okay, all right. Well, now we're going the other way, I think.
No, I'm just teasing. No, it was. I mean, it was a failure, but not a big. I mean, it's a fucking game. I don't really care. But you know, being mindful of that clock and pushing that tempo is really, well, I should say those two different points. Being mindful of the clock, and equally knowing when to push the tempo. I think it was the game with Carly, which actually we're going to talk about too. No, I'm not going to talk about the game with Carly, but I'm talking about players like the players that we had at the game with Carly later on in mastering the game.
Okay. Well, I think that you do kind of, you've danced around it a little bit too, is wanting to savor and really enjoy what you're doing. And I think that it does. I mean, an argument could be made that if everybody's enjoying it, like, even if it doesn't end, maybe that enjoyment is what you're there for. Maybe that's like, if everybody enjoys just the investigation of the house, but then you don't find out. I mean, yeah, maybe that's unsatisfying, but maybe that itch has been scratched.
It's so true, because I know in all of the games that haven't gotten to the ending that I wrote, I was so wrapped up in watching what the players were doing and the enthusiasm for which they're doing. Yeah. I think the other issue is my own writing as a GM. You know, I basically wrote a 2 or 3 part game and tried to fit it into an hour or 3 hours. Actually, you know what? And that's true, because the game in Buffalo, we started like an hour late because they did this raffle. I totally forgot about that. But anyway, no, the idea of being mindful of the clock and pushing the tempo when necessary are both really important. One of the other big tips with managing time, and I think, Justin, this is something that you did during your game for Chronicle, is having elements that you can add or cut out depending on time. And I think you mentioned that I know when we were talking on the ride over, you're kind of like, oh, I have the guy, the big bad, in another house, but he might just be the floor above, or he might come down and visit them depending on time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do the same thing, sort of the modular aspects to the story.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically what it is, you know, say they've got to investigate a mansion, they've got to find the you know, who's causing something in the town, and they find what's causing it's in the town, but they, like, I've got it planned that guy's actually maybe he's on a carriage out of town already trying to escape, or maybe he's hiding out in a different house, and maybe that could make the story more interesting. But being able to, I guess, sacrifice that extra detail in the name of ending the story and wrapping up the story completely, and just making it so, okay, yep, the guy's just in the house. He's just one floor above.
Oh, absolutely.
You got to confront him there.
And we do it all the time on stream. It's tougher when you're in person, because you can see those big blue beautiful Carly eyes just looking at you going, tell me there's more, Harlan, tell me it wraps up. And I'm like, there's more, don't worry. Or the Rin eyes, who are just also big, beautiful. I don't think they're blue. I don't think either girls' eyes are blue. And the boys are beautiful too. I don't want to be sexist here. The big, beautiful Mike and John eyes. And Drew. Yep. Oh, Drew is such a heartthrob. Anyway, so yeah, time constraints, managing time. The other thing, or the last thing I would say, from me at least, under managing time, is to slow players at times. But you know what? The other thing I want to say in managing time goes back to the game with Carly, where it's like dealing with distracted or slow players in the game, which we're going to touch on when it comes to sort of player distractions. But sometimes you come across a character, or a player, I should say, that's just they're derailing the speed in which you're trying to tell something. And that was an issue that we had with the game that I ran for Carly, and some of the people. Yeah, they weren't bad. They weren't bad people. They were distracted and they wanted to do their own thing. But we'll talk about that in a second. managing time. Justin, any other thoughts on that? How to manage your time?
Managing time. Well, I mean, the modular thing I think really helps, and that actually ties into improv and structure and knowing a story well enough and knowing all of your parts to be able to, make little shortcuts and bring things together that necessarily wouldn't be there. Managing time during a session. Actually, when you first said that, I thought you were talking about managing time outside of the sessions, like planning for GMing. But that's
a
kind
whole
of
new
world.
We'll do that on a game prep part 2.
A whole new world.
A whole new world.
Managing time. Don't break into song. Break out into song.
Well,
yeah, I mean, that's worth it.
Well,
that's really what everybody comes.
So yeah, there's some thoughts on managing time. Hopefully that gives you a few ideas of what to work with. Again, being mindful of the clock, adding elements or cutting them as needed, and pushing the tempo along as GM. Those are some of our tips for working within a window. Second point on mastering the game: keeping on track. One of the questions that was posed to us is, how do you keep a story on track and still allow players agency, specifically in a one-shot? Now, in an ideal world, obviously all players would have agency 24/7. But, as we talked about in improv, unless you're the kind of player character that actively is seeking the MacGuffin, or whatever your story might be, more often than not, the players are just standing around. What are you laughing for?
I just like the word MacGuffin.
Don't you?
You must find the MacGuffin.
Kind of sounds like a police dog, doesn't it?
McGuffin?
MacGuffin the police dog?
Isn't that a simple thing, McGruff?
I don't know. Maybe, sure. But yeah, stories need to be told, and especially with new players, especially with players who are interested in being told a story, which exists very often, putting all the agency on them to put the story forward, it doesn't really work as well. So to keep on track, occasionally you do need to push your players along. This kind of goes with managing time. So how do you do that without, McGruff the crime dog? So how do you do that without losing the player's agency, Justin? How would you push the tempo, keep on track to the story without sacrificing their independence?
I think this comes down to that modular thing again. I think it's giving the illusion of agency. Like they don't necessarily need to have agency, but as long as they think they have agency, then your players are happy. And it sounds like I'm kind of pulling the wool over their eyes, and maybe I guess I am, but
you know what? It's so true. You're right.
Yeah, if I know who the big bad is going to be at the end, I'm not going to I'm going to say, like, yeah, you guys can go wherever you want. You can, drive downtown, but sometimes it's trickier than others. But if they go completely off course, I'm working hard, but I'm constantly going to be thinking of ways that I can tie that big bad into where they're going.
Absolutely.
I can just kind of translate what I've created over here and Frankenstein it, put it to wherever they've decided to go instead of where I intended for them.
For sure. I think you're right. And I think that modular aspect of it, I think it relates to this as well. If you want them to go this way, and then give them the illusion of choice to say, okay, you can go left or right, but regardless of whether they go left or right, they're going to go the path that you want of them.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah. That's a good way of describing it too. It's like, because they don't know. They don't ultimately know. They don't have your GM sheet with them. They're not going to be able to see, like, oh, well, we went left there. We should have gone to the treasure room. Yeah. So that's what I say. What do you say?
No, I totally agree. I do it often. I mean, there are times when you draw a map and you want the players to explore it, and that's very classic D&D, and there's nothing wrong with that. One-shots are a bit different. You're trying to tell a bit of a tighter story. You want to have a nice conclusion, and you're trying to get the story across. having the illusion of choice to sort of fulfill this idea is okay. You know, put it this way. A player might be angry if they looked at the map and saw that they could go left, right, or the center, and you're going to do the exact same thing no matter what. That might make them angry. But if you just took out the choice and only had a hallway, they're going to be angrier. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to be like, well, you know, we walked down this hallway and then a spinning knife comes and then I had to roll under a thing. To me, and it's funny because I think Tomb of Horrors revealed this. I mean, choice is irrelevant if it's all sort of shit anyway. If you knew as a GM that out of 3 options, one is going to be the hands down most fun, I'm okay with not really having a choice. Because ultimately, it's going to be so much more enjoyable. And that's a bit of the responsibility of a GM to be like, well, you know, like if you write 3 encounters, okay? 3 encounters that we can randomly come across on the road. And one of them is so good. One of them is like, oh, it's clever and it's quirky and it's fun. And the other 2 are like, eh. Are you going to pull out the other 2? You're going to be like, fuck it, let's just do the really cool one. I mean, you could be fair and you could roll a 1d6 and half it and take the more boring one, but you're going to be disappointed. You're going to go, and the players wouldn't have known that there was another option that they could have done. Why not just take the choice? And if you're going to make the choice, then why bother writing the other 2? That's sort of my takeaway.
Yeah. Like, I definitely agree with that. I think that in some cases, I guess, I don't know, like, I'm thinking about the objectivity and how sometimes it's nice as a player to be in a world that feels objective. And I guess, again, it comes down to whether it is objective or not. As long as I feel that it is, then that's what matters most. But I'm thinking about like Adventures League, like that map that like was drawn out and it looked beautiful, and it was like the same map in the adventure module, and it was like, and she played everything the way like everything was in the rooms that they were supposed to be.
Totally.
Like there is something to that I think is enjoyable.
There is. But I guess my counter to that would be that this is more in the sense of one-shots. And to me, a one-shot, when someone's sitting down to play, they're like, okay, we only have this many hours to do it. We only have this much to do it.
Right. Yeah, true.
And we have the benefit of playing a long-form campaign and exploring every room. And we could have spent another 2 sessions in that prison if we wanted to. But, you know, a lot of people don't. And I believe that's the intention of this question. Again, asking how to keep a story on track and still allow for player agency. And to me, it would be grant a bit of an illusion of that, or give them different ways to find the same information. If you really need them to follow a story and they're going totally off the beaten path, you know, loop in other ways to find it. As Bird of Nick says, do the right thing, lie to your players.
Another like time, like it might be that they're going off of track, but it might be that just they don't know what to do, where they're just completely like stuck and like, we're just gonna sit in this prison cell and like, you know, figure it out. And what would you say in that situation, Harlan?
If it's your responsibility, if you failed,
telling
them what to do. If they don't know what to do,
if they don't know what to do, if they're like in this, and you feel like you've made the story and their next move pretty obvious, but for whatever reason they're afraid to go into that room, they're afraid to take the next step, what do you do? It would
depend on who I'm playing with.
Like, you're not going to force them into that room, but you still want them to have the agency to say, okay, we're going to do this, but what would you do? Make sure they still feel that way.
There's a few different ways I would go about this. If it was you and Joe and the guys or whatever, I'd probably be like, I think you're fine just going. If I was playing in convention with other people, sometimes it's kind of fun to build that up. Like one of my favorite things, and anyone who's played with me from the stream that's watching tonight will know I'll do this. It's like I'll purposefully misspeak. Like I'll be like, oh, you're going in that room? oh, okay, no, that's fine. We can re-roll your character. Well, I mean, you're gonna be fine. Like I'll
Right.
sort of like jokingly slip, and be like, oh, okay, no, that's fine. We don't need your character to move on. I mean, when she dies, she'll be. I mean, you're gonna be fine. Like, and I love doing that. So when when players are like hesitant to go into a room, sometimes I'll double down and be like, okay, good. Like, yeah, you definitely don't want to go in there, because
Right.
there's usually one person in the group that's going to be like, well, no, I'm going to go in. But more importantly, I'm sort of overplaying the fact that I'm sort of satirizing the fact that you're being too cautious. If I'm kind of like, oh yeah, no, you're going to step on a nail and hurt yourself anyway. It's like they kind of give them a second to be like, okay, well, maybe I'm being too hypersensitive here. And then they just kind of go in. So it's kind of going the other way with
Right.
it, rather than telling them it's safe, kind of being like, oh yeah, no, you're definitely going to die in there.
So that's
It's almost
so
like,
you do it kind of on a meta level.
yeah, but that's just because I like watching people. It's so funny just for them to be like, what? You just said I was going to die. And I'm like, what? No, I didn't. It's good. He kept killing me off. I didn't kill anybody off. You guys are all fine. But yeah, it's tough. You know what I mean? I think there's a matter of trust. And if someone's really being tentative or hesitant to enter a room, I would just say, okay, well, why don't you give me like an insight roll? And if they roll, you say, okay,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
fine.
Yeah, there you go.
You can use mechanics to give it a little forward. But yeah, that's how to keep a story on track. I think we helped a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think we got a little off track there.
Well, we do what we do. Next is player distractions. Again, part of mastering the game is combating player distractions, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about from a convention. Distracted players. Well, first and foremost, I think there's some very easy rules to do when you're around the table. One of the rules we have on the stream is no phones. Back in the early days, there were many people, Michael mainly, to be honest, who was like always on his phone. You can look through those old videos and you'll see him like looking down, like touching his phone, which never looked good for us. But it's something that translated well in our own games around the table. We're at the level now where we respect RPGs. You know what I mean? I think we have the unique advantage, you, me, Joe, and Chris, of each having been GMs. We know how it feels when someone's not paying attention. We know how it feels when you have to repeat something. We all have the ability to be like, okay, I'm not going to be on my phone right now because it's rude. And I think that's something you don't get until you have that put against you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's something
Definitely.
that...
Well, I think also, like, I think we've learned that the game is much more enjoyable if you really like give yourself consciously to the GM, like, especially like if they're doing like a description of a room. It's easy, especially like it's kind of difficult like on the stream, like you've got like all of these like tabs that you can open. You can go on Facebook, you can watch the Discord, which is fun to watch. And that's usually when it's kind of hard to resist the temptation to do this when someone is giving like a description, a physical description that, your character's not involved yet. But I've found that it's much more enjoyable if I don't let myself get distracted and really engage with what it is that you or Joe is saying. It's a better experience for me is what I'm trying to say. So
no, absolutely. But
kind of
I totally agree. No, I totally agree. But I do think on a subconscious level, we feel more attached to being respectful because of the way that we have experienced it as well. You know what I mean? I think
I would agree,
most groups don't have the unique distinction of having traded off that GM role. Most groups start off and there's usually one person being the GM. Maybe another person would trade it, but at least 2 of 5 people are always going to be players, where we have had a very even trade of every single person being a GM at one time or another. If not even, at least all have been GMs for a substantial amount of time, like at least 20 games beneath each of our belts, which is a really nice thing because Chris, you, me, and Joe have all experienced when someone's not paying attention and how frustrating that can be. And through that experience, as much as it can be frustrating, gives us the tools to be like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to be like that. I don't want to treat a GM like that because I know how that feels.
Right.
And I think, not to throw him under the bus, but Alex is by far the worst for
when it comes to distractions.
When it comes to that, and I think the reinforcement of my feelings is because he's never really GM'd a long form campaign that requires people to pay attention. You know what I mean? Like if I was like this, like, what? Oh, where are we? More than a few times, he'd be like, oh my God, that's annoying. I'm going to stop doing it. You know what I mean? Or at least the hope would be. So I think we're lucky.
He would have to GM for other people because we've already learned this lesson.
We've already learned that we're going to be nice about it. But I do think we have that unique ability to have experienced that and not want to continue it. But if you're at home, honestly, one of the things that I've done in the past, and I think it's a great mindset, is leave your phones. Grab a bowl. I've heard a few different options of this. One of them is you put a bowl. Everyone who comes into your house to play the game puts their phones in the bowl, and that's the end of it. I've heard a few games where everyone puts their phone in a bowl. First person to check their phone has to buy pizza. Some people have, you know, important things going on. They're like, okay, well, I need to, and that's fine too. Then you can say, okay, you know, maybe halfway through the game we'll all stop, we'll check our phones, and we'll do it on. If someone's really persnickety about it, you can say, okay, fine, you can keep your phone on you, but please don't have it out. And finally, if someone's on their phone the whole time, I'd just be like, you know what, I don't want to play with you. I don't want to play with you. Can you put your phone away? Because it's disheartening for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're trying to like bring their character in and find ways of and just tell an interesting story. Like you've put a lot of time and energy into this, and to have someone just not engaging with that at all is a shame, because they don't realize, I guess, that you've done
work
this.
into it. Yeah,
but work into it.
It's frustrating for a number of reasons, for sure. And I don't get me wrong, I've been guilty of it as well.
Me too.
We've all been guilty of it, and I'm still working on it. This isn't a one or done type thing, and none of this is a holier than thou type thing. We are all still working very hard on all this kind of stuff. Part of the reason I have the phone bowl is because I know that I will check my phone as well too. So it's like not just a rule for the people that come over. I sometimes want to do it because I'm like, okay, I'm going to put my phone away too, and I don't want to check it.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, we could get into an entire different conversation about how tempting it actually is. Like, I had my phone sitting right over here on my desk when we first started this, and I kept finding myself looking at it, and I was like, okay, that's enough, and I just took it, I chucked it. It's on my couch now.
Dude, there's a big crack in your TV.
Oh shit.
It's so true, and technology nowadays is so great. I could pull up the map when we were playing D&D. Pulled up the map and got to look at it on my phone. So that was a nice thing.
Another, I guess, source of distractions. It's not just the phone. I mean, like, you get people who haven't seen each other in a while catching up, and I would say, like, that's an easy thing to do as a GM. Is just, you know, give it some time. Like, you kind of have to feel the room. Like, if people show up and don't like just jump into it, especially if you sense that people need to, you know, catch up and find out.
Totally. There's two ways I would combat that, because I think we're probably we're the most guilty of that, because every time we get together we want to chat, which is great because I love you guys and I want to see you and I love chatting.
Oh, exactly. Oh, for sure.
And the two ways I combat that, or would recommend combating that, is first and foremost, on the one hand, with us being older and with most of the people being older, I think we do have to respect the time of playing the game. It's like we don't get much opportunity to play. However, the counter to that is, and the second point is, if you want to play for X number of hours and you want the game to start at 12, have everyone show up at 11. Spend an hour talking. You know, do your social thing, and then have the intention of starting the game an hour later. And that's sort of a mindset that I use often for any game. Sometimes your players show up an hour late, and then you got to go straight into the game.
Sometimes that happens. Yeah, weird.
But there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with that. So long as your players recognize as well that, you know, gaming is at a premium sometimes. Especially for people who get to game so rarely, which is not us. Luckily, we get to game every week. But no, that's a really good point. And then finally, not finally, but one of the other things I want to talk about under player distractions is this Carly scenario. Not Carly per se; it's not her fault. But you know, you're going to get players that and this goes back to the managing time, player distraction. Excuse me. Whew. Burger burps. I had burgers for dinner. That's gross. Mine was accidental. Yours was forced.
I force my burps all the time.
Player distractions. What were we talking about? So, you know, every once in a while you're going to have players that want to tell their own story. So Carly was playing the Call of Cthulhu game in Toronto back in whenever the fuck that was. And we had the table. It was a 6-player game. We had 3 players on my right side, which was Carly and 2 other really nice, really great, nice players. And the 3 guys on my left were also very nice guys, but they were all friends. They were all in their mid-20s, and they were all feeling goofy. And that's a tough mindset to get into a Call of Cthulhu game with. And it was tough because you had this sort of parallel between 3 players who sort of wanted to do an investigative horror game and 3 players who were a bit more interested in being zany and goofy and improvising. And again, going back to that. So there was a point about halfway through the game where, and this is sort of when improvisation goes bad, and I was thinking about this while we were talking about the improvisation point too. One of the players was a taxi driver, and his buddy was in the front seat and opened the glove compartment, and he said, "Is there a gun in there?" And I kind of asked the guy, "I don't know, do you keep a gun there?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I grabbed the gun." And the other guy, who's the taxi driver, said, "Well, that's my gun. I go to take it back from him." And the guy was like, "Well, I don't let him." And I was like, "Okay, roll dodge," you know, and he dodged it. He's like, "But that's my fucking gun." And this like scene started, and they argued for maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes or something. And I stuck on it for too long. I really shouldn't have. And when you have players like this that are distracting the game with their own sort of tiny, insignificant back and forth, it can first and foremost ruin it for the other players at the table. And it can be frustrating as a GM because you're basically placating this argument between these 2 people for no reason. So what I did is I just sort of stopped it there, jumped to the other 3 people at the table. I was like, "Well, what do you guys want to do?" And they were like, "Well, we get out and we walk." And then I was like, "Do you want to fly down to the taxi?" And they're like, "Yeah." So they took another taxi to the location, while the other guys argued in and sort of out of character for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then eventually they wanted to come back to the game. They're like, "Okay, well, where are we?" We sorted it out. And I was like, "Do you know how to get there?" I was like, "The other players had the address. Do you know the address? Did you write it down?" I sort of was a bit of a dick about it. But they did end up finding. But they found a way because they were smart about it too. They're like, "Well, it's snowing. Are there tracks in the snow?" So occasionally as a GM, you may run into circumstances where the players are sort of derailing the game and it's giving you a difficult way to sort of keep the game on track. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this is part of player distractions, but additionally, it folds really well into a question that Bird of Nix has asked us. And they've said, how do you deal with oddball players who suddenly steal other players' horses and run around naked into the woods? Has happened, was hilarious, but unpractical for the story. What is the opinion, I guess this is a second question, what are the opinions on pre-generated characters, and as in characters who have been generated for the players by the GM, pre-generated PCs often feel like, okay, no, 2 different questions. So how do you deal with oddball players? So in this case, this is the reason I bring it up. They were oddball players. If your players are detracting from the enjoyment of the game for the other people at the table. Now, I couldn't make the call for Carly, unfortunately. I didn't feel like it was in the best interest of the other people that were playing. But From what I could tell, Carly and the other two people on her side of the table were more interested in like progressing the story. I just ignored them, literally ignored them. And in fact, there was a few points afterwards where they were like, well, okay, what's going on here? And I was kind of like, oh, you don't know. What are you guys doing? Because you are ultimately in charge of the way that the game is going to go. If they are detracting, ignore them. Like the kid in class that's kind of being like, teacher. If they are being oddball, but they're still contributing to the game, or if the other players at the table are enjoying it as well, and it's not an overall, ruining your experience of everything, sometimes it's easier just to go with it. And it's tough as a GM if you have a really clear mindset for a game. If you're like, okay, they're going to be, breaking into this bank, and something goes wrong, or the characters are just oddball, but all the characters are being silly, and all the characters are sort of doing it. You sort of have a choice. You can try to continue sticking with your story and saying, okay, no, guys, hey, pay attention. This is what we're going to do. And then you become the teacher in class who can't control it. Or you can lean into it, change the tone of what you're going for, and try to work within the confines of what they're creating. And that's a really tough situation to be in, and it's tough to sort of regain control after that point. But it's always better to let the players who are clearly trying to, control a scene move in that direction, so long as everyone's enjoying it. If they're not, cut them out and move along with the people who are enjoying your game for what you've done, is my feeling. Justin, what are your feelings on that?
Honestly, I haven't had that much experience with oddball players. I mean, besides you, Joe, Chris, Michael, Alex, and David. I haven't had most people that I've played with. I think everybody that I've played with has come into the game respectfully, at least. Maybe not as like engaged, some of them, but everybody came in respectfully. I guess the only thing I can really contribute to this is as a player, if I were in that situation, I might look for ways to either bridge the gap, like depending on how the player is being, because the player might be like just being ridiculous, like you said, but still like pushing the story forward. So as a player, it might be like my character's role might turn into, okay, like babysitter. I'm kind of the babysitter of this character. Like, I'm the one that's like, why are you doing that again? Like, come on. Like, all right, fine. You can have my gun. All right, let's just go. Let's get to the scene. And sometimes that might work. I don't know. I'm kind of hesitant saying it because I think sometimes it could backfire and then you've got kind of two players. But if you can kind of be that bridge where you're like, okay, yeah, I see what you're doing. It's funny, and I'm including it in the story, but I also want to get back here. So, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of like the kid in class that wants the attention. Rather than shutting him down, it's just going to make him want more attention. You sort of bridge it. You'd be like, oh, Michael's being very funny, everybody. Hi, Michael. Hey, Michael, can you come up to the class and talk about math? It's like, okay, well, you get the kid to do what you need him to do. You're bridging it in a way that brings it back to your story. And that's definitely a way that you can do it, too. It's a bit more difficult depending on how reactive the person is. But
well, I think also, like, it might be... It would be like a bit of a technique, and it probably wouldn't work every time, but giving them something that their character might be interested in, or might want to draw in, and they might just totally ignore it. But I mean, not saying that you did anything wrong. Like, I probably would have handled it in that same way, but for the sake of argument, if you said like, oh, there's another gun in the car, then that might have just been like, they might have just brushed over that and been like, oh, okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are always ways to go about it. I think at the time I didn't realize it was gonna be such an issue. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
How
it's one of those
you,
things.
Right?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like, is there a gun? I'm like, yeah. He's like, goes to grab it. It's like, cool, the guy's got a gun. So you're driving. Well, what, did you grab my gun? Yeah. So you're driving. Okay, well, give me my gun. You know what I mean? So you don't realize it sometimes. You're like, what? Okay, well, whatever. Also, even before that, I wasn't really keen on including the guys. They were a bit.
It was gonna turn into something. Sometimes, like, I guess it's just inevitable. Like the player is going to try to get the attention that they're trying to get by acting that way.
Yeah, so player distractions. Finally, one of the things that David Johns just mentioned, and it sort of goes well under this heading, is that he sort of mentioned that he's had so many stories that he never got to tell because the players took them in a different way, based on, I guess, player distractions, based on choices, things like that. And one of the things I would say about that is that's great. Honestly, I can't tell you how many great games I've run based on the leftover trimmings of other games. You know, like honestly, a lot of Dex Dalton exists because of pieces I cut out of The Strange. Ideas that I wrote down for a campaign that never came to fruition, I just trimmed off, put into another little pile. I run whole games based on things I've cut out of other games that didn't make the cut. I'm pretty sure all of Trapped in an Elevator with the Murderer came from a concept in
End of the World?
Something. There was a game a campaign I ran. Wasn't The Strange. What other silly campaign have I run?
Not Grim.
Have I done another silly campaign? Must have been a silly one shot or a two shot. Or maybe
that's gonna be hard.
I don't remember. All I know is literally there was something I didn't get to work in a game that I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'll make him a murderer in this. And then I was like, you know what, the murderer will have multiple personality. You know what, it'll just take place in the elevator. Okay, you know what, that's a whole new game. So use those frustrating moments to your advantage. Trim all those little bits of extra story that you want, all those great conclusions that you've written, and keep them in a file. I have literally files on my USB drive of ideas and short little tidbits that are going to be chipped out. And honestly, for the ones that become too convoluted or they're too far gone, you know what I do with them? I turn them into short stories. I just go, man, to get back to that point that they were in and go the way I wanted it to go would take too long. It won't work in a whole new campaign. So I'll just spend an afternoon and write a few paragraphs, and it feels good. It's sort of cathartic to get to see the ending that you wanted to see, and then you got a nice little short story on your fingertips.
Yeah, that's actually another aspect that I would like to touch on someday, not today, but the writing aspect of role-playing games and the actual narrative elements of it and how to create these things. And then I think a lot of GMs, a lot of people who write their own stories, especially, like, probably applies to people who run adventures, but especially if you write your own story, I think that, like, it's such a great opportunity to try to branch out and start writing your own stories.
Definitely.
I think RPGs are a really great opportunity for writers to have that instant feedback. But I mean, to branch off and try that actual, like, writing, you know, for like a story's sake, like a novel or something like that, I think you've got it in you. If you are a GM and you write your own campaigns, I think you've got it in you.
Yeah.
To do something like that.
Carly said that's a good idea, and then Bird said, yeah, a very good one.
A very good one?
You're not watching the Invictus Academy for no reason. We're full of good ideas. Bam, bam. Don't shoot yourself in the head. That's a bad idea. So there you go. Player distractions. There's some ideas of how to combat that. Next up on Mastering the Game, we have how to keep long-form games interesting. So this is something that we've all managed a bit. We've all sort of toyed with ideas back and forth on how to do this. And I want to address a few ideas in the around the table sense. First and foremost, how to keep them interesting. And I think this is a big one that I've recently realized, and it was through talking with Joe. We're now doing an Adventurers League game monthly, around the table, not on the stream, just friends having some fun, and it's great. But one of the things that I think really worked is assigning roles in a meta sense. The timekeeper, the calendar keeper, the monster tracker. Somebody in charge of the purser, when you manage the gold and shit.
The bursar.
The bursary.
Bursar. Yeah.
Being in charge in a meta sense, having this responsibility outside of the game is a really great way to keep it interesting, because you have another stake in it. You're not just doing what your character would do, you're sort of doing above and beyond a little bit of that. So that's one of the ways we like to keep it interesting. Another way, personally, I like to keep campaigns interesting. This is just because I have ADD. Changing the setting constantly. You can look at pretty much any one of my campaigns, and I think any of them would hold up to the test of continual change in their setting. If you look at The Strange, we went through fantasy to space to whatever. But even Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu was always in the 1920s, but we went through an orphanage, a mansion, haunted woods, a road stop, a sanitarium, bookshop. Almost every episode had a new location. And Grimm, again, we went back in time at certain aspects. There was wood elements, there were the small town elements, there were the main town elements. And I think changing that up is a really important thing. I think it's really easy, especially in more traditional role-playing games like D&D, to spend so much time in one town, in similar settings. And just because you are in the same town doesn't mean you have to do similar settings. It's honestly, I would go as far as to say, not in a mean way, but sometimes it's a bit lazy storytelling. If you don't always have to meet at the bar. You know what I mean? You can get through, and Justin and I have talked about this before, but one of the things I'll do when I'm writing a game is I will try to get different locations as much as possible. Right. If I write a game and I'm Justin wakes up in a hotel, goes down to the lobby, and then I want him to be greeted by a man who offers him a job, and he says yes, and he gets changed and then goes out and does that job. You could easily have that be the hotel, the lobby, his hotel room, the lobby, and then outside. But to infuse a different location with each step in that is so much more appealing and so much more attractive. Change the scene. Put the same setting. The person can meet you anywhere you want. Be more inclusive about the story that you're telling.
I think you really guided that as well as a player in Basilisk. Basilisk, I think, could have been a lot more... stagnant. It could have taken place mostly at the university in your dorm room, and then also at Ben's, Old Man Ben's. But you also incorporated the diner. Let's make the diner a place.
Yep, that's right.
Let's make the cafeteria a place, or the courtyard. Her house, this Blackstone Hall or whatever, would have been in the game. But looking back, if I think, and the forest, the stream by the forest. That was your creation as a player, and so I think having you in that game really helped to create those. It's kind of like a palette almost, when I think about the game, it's got it's a certain fresco of places and colors of places that we went.
It's true, and that's a $5 word there.
Fresca is like a fresca, It was very refreshing.
I could go for a fresca. I haven't had a fresca in years.
I don't know. I don't like pop so much anymore.
Oh,
I'm not a big fan of pop.
You're not a baby anymore.
I'm not a baby. Well, I still like Coke every now and then. I still like a good old root beer.
Coke's pop.
Is it? No,
I don't
no,
like pop
drink it.
anymore, but you know, Coke.
You know, Coke's good.
Yeah,
Root
Coke's
beer's
pretty
good.
good.
So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I think that, like, I guess you can add it as a player as well. Like, you can, if your GM isn't, I guess, going to do that, if you as a player are starting to feel a scene change, you might be able to, like, kind of direct and say, like, hey, well, why don't we talk about this at the diner, or why don't we check this out at the library, you know, rather than just looking it up on the internet here. That can add just a little bit more enjoyment. And
I totally agree,
variety.
and I try to do that as a player and GM as often as possible, because again, I think it's interesting for everybody involved. A PC gets more opportunity to interact, to describe the scene, to, you know, XYZ, and the GM gets more opportunity to infuse life into that storybook. I think it's really easy to go from home to the bar, from home to the bar, from home to the bar, and never even think about what else exists in the town. These are real places. And I would say a rule of thumb when you are trying to keep long form games interesting and keep in the back of your mind, and it works with anything, even one shots, try as little as possible to repeat scenes. I've said it in previous Invictus Academy episodes. It's something that I believe for a long time, and most of my games stand up to it, except for like the Lazarus Project, since that's like the whole thing is meant to be repeated.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's a really good rule to have.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, it's one of two rules that I sort of have always internalized, and one is try not to repeat scenes, and the second is flip what's expected. Because like 90% of the time I will write something and I'm like, it's too expected, and then I'll flip it. I'll go the other way. It's like, oh, the guy who sounds bad is bad. It's like, well, no, actually he's good. So fuck you. And the third, here's another little trick. You ready for the third Harlan secret?
Wait. Okay, now I'm ready.
I might have told you this before. I don't know if I have. I know I've told Joe this. Wherever the game starts in your mind, start it earlier. Did I tell you this?
Started earlier. So
However,
if you think the game starts at the beginning of the dungeon, start it. If
Start
you think
the
this
scene
game
earlier.
starts in the tavern leading into
You
the
started
dungeon,
earlier. Yeah.
started earlier. Interesting.
Have I ever talked about this?
No.
Okay,
you
so
haven't.
this is a good. I might as well talk about this because this is something that
Yeah.
I've had since probably the first Call of Cthulhu campaign.
Right.
When you're writing a game, whether it be a one-shot or a campaign, you're always going to start, you're going to write your story, you're going to start at the beginning, wherever you start. Whenever you've done and you feel comfortable with it, start it earlier. Always do a first scene. And it's something that I picked up, can't remember when, I don't remember why, but I have done it for years now. And it's funny because it's so internalized that I almost forget it's a rule of mine. And I was talking about this with Joe, and that's what resurfaced it. And any one of my games, anytime we've started a game, it starts, technically it starts whatever the next scene is. Whatever scene is after the scene we start the game with, that's the first scene I ever wrote. And it's a really important thing to keep in mind because first and foremost, you never want your most interesting scene to be the first one. You want it to be the second one. Because nothing is more disheartening than starting strong and fading fast. What's great is starting good, getting stronger, and then letting the game... It's an upswing. All your games will have an upswing, which is a really great... Even if the players don't feel it's an upswing, you're going to feel it's an upswing because you're swinging up to the scene you wrote. So, for instance...
Right.
Let me think. Okay, the Call of Cthulhu campaign that I wrote, the second one, was called The Witch's Mark. And I wrote that to start in their office. Starts off strong and whatever his name is, the two characters are sitting in their office and a guy walks in and gives them a job. That's how the campaign starts. And I'm like, well, that's good. That's how I want to start. But I'm going to write a first scene. The first scene was a train scene. The train comes in, a guy has a briefcase chained to his hand. He comes in, he cuts it off, the guy kills him. This is the opening scene. And then the game starts. I've done it in Grimm with sort of the poems. The poems sometimes were like the prelude to the scene, because in long form campaigns it's more confusing. I don't know, what's the last games that we've run?
What did you do last?
Dr. Dex Dalton. Dr. Dex Dalton.
Yeah. Having the house there, the house scene.
Well, the first scene was going to be you and, you know, talking to Prody, like whatever we ended up doing. I wrote a scene about 2 bumblebees reviewing the scene, or 2 fucking space bees, you know, to to preamble the scene. I always write a scene ahead of what I'm doing, and this was doubly true when we were. It was funny because I was talking to Joe about this when we went down to Buffalo to run the game for the people. And she was like, we're going to do a chapters game. I'm going to start off and you guys are walking in the woods. And this is when I sort of told her my trick. And she was like, oh. I was like, yeah, start a scene before. So she did. So instead of starting in walking in the woods, she started back during training. And this general is like saying this little spiel. And it only has to be a pickup scene. It's like a pickup scene. That's the way to describe it. It's a scene that gets you in the mood to like to like lift in. Sometimes I do them before the credits, sometimes after the credits, but they're always meant to lead into this first scene.
Okay, well, so like I'm thinking about the techniques that they use in TV shows, like the X-Files, where you have that little scene where like it shows like what is this episode's going to be about, and then you've got Mulder and Scully, you know, being bad at FBI agents,
totally
not understanding them.
Yeah, and they work. It works in everything. It's such a the last Dex Dalton episode. The last Dex Dalton episode that started. You guys, I wanted you guys to come. I wanted you guys to be at home, and I wanted her to pop through the portal, but I was like, the pickup scene will be fucking
broccoli.
The broccoli people. You know what I mean? Sometimes they're longer because they're really funny, and I'm like, oh, that's gonna be good.
That one reminded me of a Marvel movie.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like Guardians of the Galaxy almost, where they start like in the middle of that fight or whatever.
Definitely.
Totally different, but
no, but like that idea of like a pickup scene. Yeah. It's a common thing. It's a common trope for many reasons. A lot of popular movies have it. But anyway, that would be my tip. I mean, I know we got off topic a little bit there, but I mean, we're talking about keeping long form games interesting, and this is a great tip that I personally always feel very strongly about. I wish I could remember more games that I've run, because if you analyze all of my games, every single one will have a pickup scene.
The Long Dark has the plane before the crash, I guess.
Yeah, the plane scene, which is one that I originally intended to start it
at the crash.
I originally started at the crash scene. The pickup scene was you guys interacting on the plane.
Right. Yeah. You said Call of Cthulhu.
Don't walk in winter woods. You guys were talking about the fireplace.
End of the World. I wonder if you did. End of the World generally starts. Oh, it starts around the table or around the computer. Yeah. It starts kind of meta.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Rudy Mesler had a long pickup. I remember because I intended to start that after the carnival, and that one started at the Even Swashbuckler's Life. I remember telling Alex. I don't
remember who was Rudy Mesler.
He was like this Jewish Rudy Mesler in the Mystery of Ghost Cove. It was like a point-and-click adventure game.
Oh God, Rudy Mesler. I don't even remember what happened in that game.
I don't remember. It was not a good game. I just remember you talk like this. You
talk like this. Rude, kind of very bad stereotype Jew. I guess my thing would be, and it's like, I guess it's a lot more general, but the way I like to keep games interesting, especially long form, like over 10 sessions or so like that, is I write my sessions based around characters. So like Dragon Age is probably the example where I focus the most on this, and it's a stylistic thing for sure, because there are definitely GMs that don't focus on this, where their games are very interesting, you know, in the long form. Joe, Harlan, like I think they have a different style, but definitely Call of Cthulhu felt very much like about our characters' development and our stories. But yeah, like every session, it kind of was stressful because I didn't have a completed arc for the campaign. Like I kind of knew where I wanted them to go, but a lot of what happened to them was determined by how their characters developed and what their characters wanted. So like Harlan's character Grinner had his own motivation, so I tried to create scenes that helped to develop or take another step in those motivations. Pent, it was the same thing. He had his striving for glory and with his clan. And then for Imogen, he had different motivations. So trying to craft my sessions around, okay, what could each character want to experience? And it might not necessarily be a good thing. It might be something that challenges their characters and their characters' current beliefs. But yeah, that's something that is more interesting to me as a GM, for keeping it interesting.
No, definitely. I absolutely agree. I think not exploiting, but like utilizing character types and backgrounds is such an important part of campaign building that so many people forget it. It's not just about writing your story, it's about including the characters that are created as well. So yeah, those are some tips on how to keep long-form games interesting. Next, on mastering the game, setting up encounters. This is not my personal strong suit because I think this is more combat heavy. But one of the aspects that was mentioned in this are random encounters ever worth it? Which I totally think they are. We talked earlier about having random encounters sort of pre-planned. And that's not necessarily always the case. If you have a clear mindset for how you want an encounter to go, and you're just being random for the sake of fairness, then yeah, no, you don't have to do it. But if you honestly couldn't care, you have a few good encounters set up, and you want to be purely random with it, I think there are only good things to gain from that, especially if you're lenient. I remember a few great examples. One of them being that there was a time where we ended up attacking some goblins as a random encounter, and I think we took one as a pet, and we ended up using that goblin to we befriended it. I think you did like animal handling on it or something.
That was in one of Michael's games.
Yeah, it was. I think it was the Road to Ferelden or something like that. But yeah, random encounters, if you're an open GM, can be a great opportunity to just learn new characters. If you're fighting a bunch of cockatrices and you cut off the head of one, you have chicken for dinner. You can bend over and start cooking it up, and maybe one of the characters is a vegan, and that gives them an opportunity to talk about how they don't want to eat the chicken, or you know what I mean? Random encounters are just a platform, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can. I'm going back to very, very early when we're talking about the modular thing again. Random encounters can be a good stalling tactic, or a good tactic. If the players are going in a completely different direction than you expected, and the energy is starting to die down, things aren't interesting because you haven't planned anything in that direction, throwing an encounter at them that maybe you've planned but now it's in a different setting is a very easy way. It doesn't take a lot of resources, I guess, unless you're doing it very by the book specific and you need all the stat blocks. But yeah, if you are able to put an encounter there, then you can kind of re-rail yourself and get a bearing on where this new direction they're taking you can lead and how it could tie back into the storyline that you initially had planned.
No, absolutely. Colin said in regards to the other part, which I totally forgot, I thought you were going to say the scene where O'Shea locks himself in the bathroom and becomes a cockroach in the Dr. Dex episode. That was the preamble. I was wrong. It wasn't the broccoli people. It was the scene where So that one I had intended to start it with you on a mission, and that was the first scene. I totally forgot about that.
O'Shea.
That was the one where I was he's a prisoner, he's in a cell, he's kills himself and then he dies and then a little cockroach crawls in.
Yeah, but what did that? Oh, okay, yeah. We'll see. We'll see what that has to do with anything.
No, that had to do because that was the guy that she was hunting, who could reincarnate himself.
Right.
The whole premise of that was to sort of confuse you, but also reveal later on that here's a guy who killed himself as a cockroach was being born because he can be reincarnated. Yeah, or maybe more will happen. Who knows? Sorry, didn't mean to derail. I honestly, I read that comment from Colin, and I read it 3 times, and I'm like, O'Shea cockroach. And I thought he was referencing something else. I was like, well, I don't recognize any of that. I was like, I don't recognize O'Shea. And then I was like, wait a minute, that was last game, and I fucking wrote it. I'm like, I'm an idiot. But yeah, no, setting up encounters can be difficult. Additionally, I think, you know, like you were saying, as long as you're not too by the book, I think they can be really, really beneficial. Additionally, I think, you know, using encounters to not just pad a game, because you were talking about sort of using them in the modular sense to make a game a little bit longer and a little bit shorter, but to also sometimes throw them in there to give you inspiration, which I've done before. You know, you don't really know where you're going to go, and you want to throw an encounter and then maybe use whatever happens from that to your advantage. Or I would say to what's the word? Introduce characters. If you're starting a campaign and you want to show what kind of people they are, you know, let them come across some goblins that aren't fighting but maybe sick and see how they do it. And as I'm talking about this, I'm remembering, I had like 2 trains of thought. I remember a scene in a game. This is how many games we played, I don't remember. And I remember crouching behind a barrel out back of a bar and pouncing on a guy in the rain and stabbing him to death repeatedly. What the hell game was that?
I'm remembering that too. I think that was one of my games. I think
Grinner?
you were playing.
I feel like that might have been Grinner. Grinner and Penth. I remember Penth.
It seems like it was sooner. It seems like it was more recent than that, but
yeah, I remember Penth being in an alleyway at one point, getting hit. I think it was a boxing match or something. And for some reason in my mind, it's the same visual. Oh, you know what it was?
Like, what?
I just remembered. No, it's Graham's backstory from Chapters. Yeah.
Oh,
it was Chapters of the Undefeated. It was Graham's backstory. Because before he turned to religion, he was a rogue. And he ended up killing the guy. Totally forgot about that.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, total off topic, but that sort of example of an encounter showing the true person or showing the type of person they are, I think is a really good opportunity for role-playing as well.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, also random encounters, like you don't know what your players are going to do. They might attack somebody. And so that, I don't know if that really classifies as random. But one area where I think random encounters definitely work and are encouraged is I'm thinking about where we are in Adventures League, where like we are in a phase where we've escaped a prison and now we're in the Underdark trying to find our way back to the surface, hopefully, and survive. And so now this is kind of an exploration adventure. So like,
how excited are you to get back into it?
So fucking excited! Like,
you gotta tell Jo that she loves that.
Oh, I will tell her. So it's not just like we're gonna explore and she's got everything planned. Like, this is a system, which, like, this kind of goes back to that objectivity of like, you know, she could just like, you know, design things for us, you know, say like, okay, we're gonna have like 3 combat encounters and then you're gonna be back out and you're on the surface, and then these are the encounters we're gonna have. But no, like, this is like a list. I think she's got like a list back there of like, you know, if you roll a 56 on a 1d100, then they're going to encounter this. And so like we did a little bit of that. We got like a mushroom where we find this like glowing mushroom, and then when we like tried to like stab it and like take off a piece of it, it stopped glowing. And then she was like, and then you learned what this proxy fungus.
I want to tell you something. So the minute you guys left on Saturday or Friday, Sunday,
Sunday.
You know, she was giddy and told me some stuff. I gotta tell you this.
Okay.
So this is so off topic, but it's role playing.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, you know the Quagoth who is Prince Darendril?
Yes.
So he's dead now, obviously. She revealed to me he's just crazy. He's a full out Quagoth.
Oh wow, okay, cool.
No elven whatever, just crazy.
Good.
But the really exciting one.
Can I guess?
Guess, yeah.
What's his fucking name? The guy who died, who followed us?
Yeah.
What's his name?
Bupido.
Bupido.
Yeah.
I think he's evil fuck. I think he's like an
evil
genius.
Evil. He's a fucking crazy killer. She was like exciting me reading me his backstory, and basically he thinks he's this fucking god, and if you bring him, he'll help you, but if you like get in his way, he'll murder you. He's like insane. She was so excited telling me that. Isn't that great?
I had this feeling. I fucking knew it. I was like, all from the start, I was like, I don't fucking trust this Bupido guy. And then you guys were like, no, we gotta get this guy in.
I didn't trust him either, but I didn't think he was fucking. But she was like, I wanted you guys to bring him so bad, but he died. And I was like, oh yeah? She's like, yeah, listen to this. And she's like, read it. And it's like, Bupido is a Darrow who blah, 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 blah. However, he is absolutely evil. He has killed countless people, and he thinks he is a god. He believes everything that is happening to him is his god's plan, and basically has zero fear. Meaning he'll like jump on you, he'll fuck you up. Like, he's just evil. It's really cool.
Amazing.
I had to tell you that.
Cool. And it's so fucking lucky too.
I know, so lucky.
Like, we were gonna try to like save him, and he'll like
I didn't want to save him.
1d4 to like see if like we could like get him.
50-50 shot.
And he failed it, so that he died. Like,
yes. Sorry, everyone. So we have decided, Justin, Chris, Joe, and myself have decided to start Adventurers League. So in our spare time, once a month, we get together outside of the stream and we play a game that Joe has been running for us called Out of the Abyss. And Out of the Abyss is a D&D 5th edition module that was released only a few years ago. I think it's their newest one, and it takes place in the Underdark. And we've done 2 sessions so far. Basically, we've escaped a drow prison, which was very difficult, but we ended up getting out, and we've just entered the Underdark by the end of the last session. Justin plays what are they called?
Kenku. It's like a crow type person who doesn't actually speak, but can kind of like do like voice clips of like anything that I've heard. So one thing I was trying to get other people to get the guards to talk as much as possible so that I could emulate their voice but say the exact same things that they did. Very
cute. And Chris plays a half orc, and I play I was gonna say Khajiit.
Basically.
No, I play a Tabaxi. A Tabaxi rogue named Red. And the 3 of us have been playing this game for a few sessions, and it's amazing. It's really fun.
It's a blast. I'm excited for our next session.
It's a lot of fun going back to all this stuff. It's a lot of fun to not play with those time constraints because, ultimately we do put on a show here, and we are always trying to be conscious of, going overtime and undertime and all that kind of stuff. But it's really nice to be able to just play a game and not worry about acting. We can sort of take our time thinking about how to approach a scenario. Mind you, Chris is still the same. I'm gonna kill him. Where's my
he did pipe? Great though. He did great. You almost had that moment.
I did. I really did. Oh, I'm just teasing. You were so close. Are you kidding? I love seeing Chris in his element again. It's so nice to see him without that pressure where he just gets to be funny. He's so much funnier in regular role playing than he gets to be on the stream. Anyway, total detour. That's setting up encounters. Next, under mastering the game, environmental storytelling. How do you tell a story without NPCs? How do you let the world speak? And this was a question posed to us. And there's a few ways around this. One of the things that we can do as storytellers is obviously use mechanics to benefit us, insight, nature, things like that. But you can also allow the world to tell the story and to speak for itself. In that Fate of Eden robot game, you know, there were things that you didn't quite understand, but I allowed the world to sort of speak to the sort of difficulties that you would be facing and the sort of direction that you need to go. And while you didn't maybe know why you were there, you knew the direction of your mission, that you had to have a mission. You know, in the Fate of Eden, it was a robot protocol that was programmed into you. It can be as easy as a map or a quest or a whisper on the wind that's motivating you to seek out the destination. But ultimately, telling a story in your environment is so dependent on what environment you're looking to tell that story within, that it's sort of tough to speak on too much. I can think of multiple examples, but none of them might apply to you. Ultimately, I think what you have to do is really just investigate your environment, figure out what message you're trying to get across. For example, if you're trying to get across, if you're doing a sci-fi adventure and you're on a planet and it's Pluto and you have an hour before the world's going to freeze over and they need to warm it up and no one's there to be able to tell them, you know, maybe that's it. Let a you know, maybe they're standing next to a lake that's still mostly water, and as the shadow moves across, it's freezing slowly. You know,
absolutely, yeah.
It's easy to kind of be like, well, you're concerned by this. I mean, every once in a while, you can impose a feeling on a PC if they're not too sure what they're meant to be feeling.
Right, and I think, I mean, it's easy to like really focus on the details, but the players are going to envision the world how they're going to envision it. And sometimes they need a little bit more, but eventually there's kind of like a sweet spot, I guess, for, you know, how they envision the world and how you envision it. And sometimes giving too many details can get in the way of what they're seeing. So this is about this question, sorry, it's about the environment, right? Like how to let the environment speak for itself, right?
How to tell a story without NPCs.
I guess, so what I would say, and you're definitely right, Harlan, I think that having those, I guess, using those ideas and letting the world speak for itself can be helpful. I did not paraphrase you very well at all. But I agree with what you're saying. I think also the players can help a lot in that. And that's one area that I like to delegate personally to you, Harlan, and to Joe and Chris when they're playing is I trust you guys to create the world and really be the visionary. And this is one thing that we've been experimenting, you and I, with some of our duet one-shots. For Coda and Basilisk.
Definitely, yeah.
Like Coda, I very much was coming up with. Was I coming up with the world itself? Not so much.
You were coming up with the character, and I was coming up with the world. But you know,
right,
I think I know what you're getting at, and to speak on that is, I think there is this feeling within us as a GM that always feels, and I suffer from this myself, that always feels like they need to be more clever than the players. That you always need to sort of covet the information to the last possible second. And it's something that I'm trying to combat, because environmental storytelling, and what you're trying to say there is you're trying to get across something without the NPCs doing it. Well, you know what? There's nothing wrong with letting your player know and giving them the opportunity to experience that in a PC capacity. You know what I mean? If you're trying to get across that...
I see, okay.
If you're trying to get across in the environment that the world is going to end in a day, you know, rather than be like, okay, well, you know, it's feeling a little hotter, and, you know, the tips of the mountains are getting really steamy. Just be like...
I understand, okay, yeah.
Then you could be like, so the world is going to end in about a day. how do you think your character would realize this?
I don't think I fully understood the question. I think I was thinking about like the details and like how to create setting and world build. I wasn't realizing that, okay, so the environment is telling the story and giving you the exposition rather than the like an NPC saying like the world's going to
Correct.
end.
Instead of an NPC
okay,
being
I'm with
like,
you now.
the Windstar amulet has been stolen, we need to have it retrieved. It's like, how do you tell the story using just the environment? How do they know they need to get the Windstar amulet without, and what I'm saying is, it's so dependent on your environment. There's many ways you can cheat around it, but if it's that black and white of it, don't feel like you need to always be smarter than your player. It's okay to say, so in this mission, you guys are going to have to try to find the Windstar amulet. How do you think you would sense that? It's a magical item. It's hidden, maybe you have a dream about it, like,
Right.
don't worry about, and like I said, I suffer from this probably more than anything, where I like my twists to be experienced by everybody. When we did that villain game, Joe knew that she was the killer. I knew that she was the killer, but Justin didn't, because I wanted to have that sense of like, oh. And I don't think that's a bad feeling, because I like having that sense of sometimes, it's like, it's how we get to mix it up every once in a while. But I don't think you need to necessarily keep them in the dark just to get your sort of message across. If you can't think of a way, if you're racking your brain, spending hours trying to figure out how to outwit your players, maybe just include them. Not that that's what you're doing, but maybe you are. I don't know. I don't even know who asked.
I guess it's tricky. I mean, that's a really good question, because it is hard to like give a character motivation. Like, that's one of the most important things I think about running a role-playing game, is you have to make sure that the characters are motivated to act. So if they don't care about the the threat or the story, then they're not going to do anything. They're not going to follow your story. But you have to like plant a good seed, and it's much easier to plant a good seed with an NPC than it is with just the environment, I think.
Not necessarily. I think you can think outside the box. Like, one of the big motivations I used in Call of Cthulhu was dream sequences. Pretty much every game I started off being like, the black calls to you. You hear your daughter scream in the distance. Dreams to me are huge. Ghosts are huge. Like, there's so many non-physical things that we can utilize as GMs that we tend to sort of fall into the tropes. Like Coda. What a great example of like motivating a character through non-traditional means. Like, you knew you had to get off the track or like plant that beacon, and we used like the ghost of your dead wife to do it. Right. That was not an NPC, but it was a ghost. I mean, there was a barren planet that we decided to utilize in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because it was like the environment was extremely pivotal in the story, not necessarily on the things that my character did, but in how my character developed. My character, that's interesting. My character was developing on like another level from like actually like accomplishing his mission of setting up a beacon on this planet. He was developing on a level of like, you need to grow as a person somehow. You know what I'm saying? Like,
man, that was a good game.
That was a good game.
We did good.
There was another level there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, but I mean, in all of these situations though, like, dialogue did play a role. I don't think we've ever done a game where just the environment. Well, End of the World. End of the World is a very clear example of like motivating a character, because if someone turns into a zombie, like, you're not telling someone isn't sitting there saying, okay, people have turned into zombies, you need to survive, right?
I would say even better than that, but on the same vein would be The Longest Night, because that was one that after the plane crash, you guys had
nothing. That's true. Yes,
literally
exactly.
nothing. You had,
so then we had to use our nature to find.
And in fact, that was probably the best way. I don't even know why I didn't think about that. Environmental storytelling, that was probably the best example, because I communicated the fact that the sort of the world had like almost ended, that these buildings were vacant, that the northern lights were like dead, that there was something ominous without ever having someone be like, the world's over. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yes.
So yeah, whoever asked that, just watch The Longest Night. I already did it. I totally forgot. I mean, there were NPCs at the beginning, but the NPCs all were in the same boat. Like none of them were like guiding you. They were all like, "Oh, we crashed. Now what?"
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Anyway.
So I guess it might be that environmental story development might just be easier with survival games, because it's easy to put someone in a survival situation and like use environmental cues to show you like this is a threatening environment, and it's easier for you to say, okay, all right, I need to do something or I'm going to not survive. And I think most RPGs boil down to survival, but
well, they all deal with life and death, so yeah, I guess.
I think like the Windstar Amulet is an interesting one, but it could be done. How would you do it? How would you get people to go seek the Windstar Amulet?
Dream sequence or power.
Dream sequence?
Yeah. I'd be like, you sense a great power, or you have a nightmare where someone encapsulates this power and you're afraid of it.
Right.
Or just start the game off with the character yearning to seek out something that's long been foretold or something like that. Be like,
right.
Even if you're the only person on the planet, you'd be like, when you landed on this planet or when you were born on this planet, there have been cave drawings all over, carvings deep within the woods of this amulet, this symbol. And, you feel like after years of searching, you have a feeling of where it could be. Like I think there's a lot of options. I think we think NPCs are the only way, but I think more often than not, we get information across without even realizing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a really good question, just even for
to think
raising it up as like something to think about, as like I'm going to be thinking about it too, because it would be interesting to run a game like that and see.
Well, now it's a challenge.
Challenge accepted.
So yeah, that was part 6 of Mastering the Game. Finally, the next thing, or the last thing that we're going to talk about in Mastering the Game tonight. Again, there's so many topics in Mastering the Game, but these are things that we're focusing on tonight because you've mentioned them and we want to discuss them. And this one was an interesting one put forth by a community member called Blood in the Gutter. And basically they were asking how to convey horror and violence, but keeping it PG. And I think this is a pretty easy answer. Not to sell it
for
short.
you, maybe.
Well, I think you can. Okay. There's a lot of G and PG rated horror movies in the olden days, and because when it comes to horror, there's so much more in the unexplained than there is in the overtly graphic or violent. You can do the darkness looms, movements in the corners, the shadows projecting sharp images on the ceiling of the bedroom. You know what I mean? Rather than be like, the guy's arm gets torn off and he gets fucked. Which is just horrific. No, but you know what I mean? Like there's I think we quickly go for the jugular. It's funny because a lot of the 18 plus games that I talk about and aren't actually really that graphic or violent. I would say the only graphic or violent one that we've done as of late was that Parasite. That was pretty gross.
Right, yeah.
And Villain was up there. But those two were the Halloween episodes.
Was up there, Parasite was up there. I mean, I don't even know if Parasite was that bad. I mean, it was gross. I mean,
there were some gross things in there.
Yeah.
I just mean to say
it was pretty graphic. Yeah.
But I mean to say, like, there's a lot of things you can do. Let me think of an example just so that I can do a comparative. Let's say you come into a house and there is a body on the bed, and its stomach has been torn open, its intestines pulled out, its eyes are gaunt and hollow, its tongue has been torn from its mouth, and its teeth are cracked. Its jaw is dislocated, and it's reeling up towards the sky in sort of petrified pose. This is a terrifying scene. You can do the same thing without being as graphic. You can say you enter the room, and the body of a dead man lies in the bed. It reaches towards the sky as if it died in a fit of pain. Its body is torn apart, and you feel nauseous to your stomach as your eyes glance over the horrid sight. It's not as descriptive, but it's as graphic, without being anywhere near as disgustingly detailed, at least in my mind.
Yeah, but what did you do there, Harlan? Because that's like, I'm listening to that and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Like, that's fantastic description, and it's almost even more chilling to hear it that way. What were you doing there? Can you break that down for us?
Well, in the first instance, I'm describing what you're seeing.
Right.
I'm saying what the physicality of the creature is. It's breaking down whatever you're seeing. In the second instance, I'm trying to focus more on how you feel as a player. You'll notice the second time I said your eyes move over the body, and you feel sick to your stomach. I'm not saying here's the disgusting thing in hopes that you'll feel sick. I'm not explaining the disgusting thing and telling you feel sick. You know what I mean? And there's a very subtle difference. It's sort of like, it's almost the reverse, when you're like a parent, if your child is afraid of a dog, rather than be like, oh my God, that dog is so frightening, Henry, and instead it's like, it's worse as a parent to do what I'm saying here and being like, oh, Henry, you're afraid of dogs. You know what I mean? Like, whereas in role-playing, you can do the opposite and say, it's a bad example because it's the opposite of what I want to do. But in
role-playing, you're suggesting,
yeah.
You're not doing it in the hopes that they will feel this way. You're already suggesting like your character.
You're auto-suggesting how they feel rather than forcing them to feel it. Right. And again, using that same example, in the first example, I am creating the scenario so you feel sick. In the second example, I am vaguely describing this scenario and telling you that you feel sick. So the horror isn't as immediate to you. It doesn't feel put upon you. The same way me hitting you, would hurt versus me saying, if I hit you, you'd get hurt right now. You still have the same impact, but it's not immediate. You're not feeling the hit on you. And I find using words like that separate you from the action instead of you actually feeling scared or actually laughing. Well, you know what? Let's do it in a positive way, in a funny way. If I do something in character that makes you laugh, if I'm like, I'm Ebenezer Buckles, you're laughing. It's great. Versus if I say a funny man comes in and he says, I'm Ebenezer Buckles, and you feel very jovial about it, you don't, that's not funny. You don't actually laugh in that instance. But by the same token, relating that to horror, you don't feel terrified in that moment either.
Right, exactly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's so like you're kind of protecting the audience from
very much so
the gruesomeness of it.
Exactly.
But I think it's funny because in humor, I think that it can be done in a way, for horror, it can be done in a way that actually, like, the narrator's trying to protect you from how gruesome this is by just telling you that, you feel gross, you feel sick. And people don't want to feel sick, so they're like, wow, like, this is that scary. It kind of adds to the intensity of it without making it like horrific. Whereas with humor, it's like, okay, so they're protecting me from finding something funny. Like, I want.
Well, that's why no one does that, right? No one says humor that way, and I'm only doing that example to show.
I understand.
You how,
no, it's a good. No, it's a good parallel.
And again, Bjorn mentions lines and veils, which is a different way that I heard it. Lines and veils to me has always been sort of a teaching tool for like things that are uncomfortable. You know, a line that you cannot cross, a veil that you can imply. But it's a great example, and to expand on his example, I would say Lovecraft horror is a great example. Oftentimes, a failure on a GM's part to convey horror is to name the creature rather than explain it. And you can tell me what's more terrifying. If I say you enter the room and in the corner is a slobbering mass of tentacles, they flick wildly and without seeming, reason, they spin above the head and slap with wet thuds against the dry wall of the barren room. Its 8 dark eyes, reflect off the torch you hold in your hands as its slobbering maw stands open and agape, waiting to taste you. Versus I say, you enter the room and in the corner is a Shoggoth. It's like, it's just totally different. And the same way that he's saying, you can describe the fish and say it's this beautiful silvery scale versus saying it's a fish. And that's another way to sort of cut down the horror. I guess the trick is, and what this blood in the gutters is implying, is to still convey the horror without the violence. And I think you can do that by explaining to the player what they're meant to be feeling at this point.
Yes. I think also, like, you can create a lot of suspense without there being any gore at all. Just the simple act of opening a door and creating that tension of like, okay, you're gonna open that door and you're just gonna die. Like, you got to roll up your character. Like, sometimes that can be like just a fun little thing.
No, it's true.
A little bit, but you can create a lot.
Oh, it really can. And in a sense, I think as a GM, you're a director. You really are, and that's why Feng Shui uses the term director. And I think, at least for me, I've had experience in like going to film school and stuff like that. So reading a scene and knowing, like kind of being like, okay, I'm going to build up tension in this scene, and like, all that kind of stuff builds on what you're trying to do. The same way a funny scene, really hitting it on a few more times and sort of making it a little more and more funny every time you hit it.
Yeah.
Right.
I hear you. I just had a wave of horror,
humor. Ask me what the secret of comedy is.
What is
timing?
You're so happy. You're so happy with yourself. Well, everyone, that was great.
All right, that is the mastering the game. So again, we got managing time, keeping on track, player distractions, how to keep long-form games interesting, setting up encounters, environmental storytelling, and blood in the gutter. Finally, we're going to end the stream on bringing in players that are new to role-playing, which is something I've done a few times. And
you have fond memories of, apparently.
No, not really. I'm still just laughing about that bit.
Oh.
No, but you know what? I gotta say, one of the quickest and easiest examples to role playing, at least the pitch that I do to people that are interested, is that it is an interactive story. And I sort of really break it down. And I've done this a lot because it's tough for people sometimes to understand what we do. They're like, what do you do? I'm like, well, we tell stories. I basically say this. I say, we tell stories that you interact with. And then I'll give a really bad example and say, okay, I would tell you, okay, you're walking down the street one day and a car pulls up in front of you and he says, get in. I know everything starts off that way. What do you do? And whoever I'm telling this to will either say, oh, I keep walking, or I get in. And then I roll from that. I say, okay, you get in the car. Perfect. They slam on, they look to you and they say, Leanne, I'm from the future and we need to go save your, daughter's daughter. She wants to be, prime minister, but she's got a lot of trouble. Are you ready? Do you believe him? Do you get out of the car? What do you do? And it's sort of like a choose your own adventure. And I find explaining it to somebody in a really simple way, that I'm telling a story and you're going to choose what happens, is sort of the easiest way for people to understand what role-playing is. From there, everything expands. I don't introduce or even talk about rules until you need to explain a chance of randomness. And most people get hooked on that idea once they're kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of fun. Especially if you pick something that's sort of generic to them.
Well, I think the choose your own adventure pitch is very relatable, because I mean, choose your own adventures are a thing for a reason, but they never are as popular as they could be because the format just isn't there. Like I remember buying books like Goosebumps books as a kid and being like, oh, this is like choose your own adventure, and like you have to turn your pages. I always felt like it was kind of a waste, that like all of these pages I'm never going to read because that's not the adventure I chose. So the book is only like 60 pages long and not 150. So I think people want that ability to choose their own adventure, but all of the mediums that they are able to do it, whether it's a TV or a book, it's not enough. It's not free enough.
It's true. And I think using that as sort of the starting point to explain what we do is really great. And it's a really attractive concept for many people. So that's always, anytime I'm trying to explain to someone what we do, that's the first way I do it. So if you have a friend, they're like, oh yeah, role playing, I'd be interested in trying. You don't have to do that first step, obviously, but that's how I typically explain that to somebody. If you have a friend, what?
Oh, just what Carly's saying. I love the Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventures. So many summer vacations. John says, I never got that carnival. Well, it's funny because that's the exact one that I read. And maybe that has to do with some of my frustration with Choose Your Own Adventures because I never got out.
I never got out of the carnival. John, you're
And I actually remember flipping through the book and looking for the page that says you succeed.
Oh, that's like, so funny. You guys are cute. So let's say you have a friend and they say, I'm interested in this role-playing thing. What is it about? I'd like to try a game. First and foremost, I would cater to their interest. Cater to your player and your audience. You're trying to sell somebody on a concept that is, frankly, sort of intimidating. And unless you're someone who's not afraid to act silly and sort of be silly, it's going to be really tough for someone to wrap their head around that idea. I remember my first forte into role-playing with people who were new to it was to run a familiar setting. I think I picked a Halloween party. I was like, perfect, you're going to a Halloween party. What character you dress up as? Include them in as much simple decision-making as possible. Because I think it's really nice. It's really intimidating. And frankly, I don't like starting off with being like, okay, you could be a rogue, a wizard, a fighter, a barbarian, a fucking sorcerer. Here's your DC. Here's your AC. Here's your... it's like so daunting. I'd be like, no, thank you. It's much better to be like, you're going to a Halloween party. What do you want to dress up as? Perfect. You get to the Halloween party. You interact with some guy. He comes up to you, blah, blah, blah. You hear him moaning in the basement when you're going to get a bottle of wine. Do you check it out? You know what I mean? Make an intriguing, simple scenario that's easily relatable, that caters to your player and your audience. To me, that's how I would introduce somebody. That's just me, though. I like to please people.
I think that's a really good way of going about it, from the pitch to the delivery. Yes, definitely, like focusing on the player itself and their own interests. Now, it's not for everybody.
No.
Role playing is like really, really special. I love it. Like all of my best friends love it, and I think it's a really, really great opportunity for people to like express themselves and be silly, be creative. I think it's one of the best forms of creativity, like social. Like I don't know, I love it. Again, some people it just does not tickle them. It just does not interest them. And if that's the case, don't take it on as a failing of yourself. I would say that it would be easy to think like, oh, well, if I was a better GM, then like maybe they would want to play with us still, or they want to. It has nothing to do with you. Some people just don't want to learn, don't want to develop.
No, totally. And I think this to me is more geared to the people who want to learn, but they're new. It's like, how do you introduce them to that?
Yeah,
At least that was my understanding of the question. But you're absolutely right. There's some people that they're not interested, and I don't think it's ever worthwhile to try to force somebody who's not interested to play. It's just going to be a tax on you and no fun for them.
Exactly.
But if they are interested in playing, I think finding a good story for them that caters to them, that interests them, including them, and also working with them. When we played at the Chronicle Brewing Company, my friend Erin sat down and joined Joe and me for our game, and she had role played a few times, but always, I think, wanted to take it more seriously than the people she played with allowed her to. And, you know, she sat down and she was pretty quiet, and, you know, I really worked with her on being like, well, you know, you can talk about this and this and this. And one of the things that really appealed to her was she ended up playing a ranger with a pet owl. And the minute she could use the owl, she was like, oh God, I named this owl, and this owl sees everything, and da-da-da-da. And like, that was the thing that she connected with immediately.
Right.
Because it was a pet. And she left that game being like, oh my God, I got to come back. Which, January 12th is the next Chronicle Brewing night. So she's going to be there.
Whoa!
January. So fun. Maybe I'll run some Call of Cthulhu. Anyway, so, you know, understanding what your player or friend wants and sort of giving the opportunity to play that out gives them a sort of a stretch of that. You know, they get to flex that fantasy. If it's a person who doesn't really like fantasy, or a person who doesn't really like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons type scenario, don't play Dungeons and Dragons. If they're like, Lord of the Rings sucks, then don't be like, okay, you're an elf wizard. Be like, okay, what do you like? Exactly. Oh, I like Fallout. Find a fucking Fallout RPG. Like, who cares? If you like the person. If the person's an asshole, don't bother.
Preach.
So, we got some final questions here. So that's how to, I mean, there's not too much on bringing new players to role-playing. We'll stretch on it more, but we only have about 15 minutes left, and I want to answer some of these questions. So, Bob Lyle asked a really good question early on, and he said, how do you get into the mood to play when you're just not feeling it? And I think this is something that we have all been in.
Yes, we've been.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we stream every week, rain or shine, Wednesday at 8 o'clock. There are absolutely times I am not feeling like it. My grandmother died this year. I got divorced. I had surgery. I moved out of my home. I have not had a great year. But I equally think sometimes getting yourself into that mindset of role-playing, of stepping in the shoes of something else, can be pretty cathartic. I know I've got to act out scenarios that I wish... You know when you, like, have an argument with somebody in the shower, and you're like, man, I should have said that. Oh, God.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant, like, when you're in the shower with someone, and then you get into an argument.
No, showers are free. No, but you know, when you're like, oh man, it's just it does. Role playing can be like that. You know, if you didn't get to say that thing you wanted to say in that argument, and you're feeling angry about it, maybe you want to play an angry character. If you didn't feel like dad loved you enough, maybe you want to play a dad that loves his son. Maybe you want to play a character that, you know, is cool,
has a dog,
suave, has a dog if you don't have a dog.
Yeah, you didn't really want to have animals in real life, so you just wanted to try that out.
I think it's a decision to say, I'm just going to push myself into this. And listen, for a lot of people, that's not going to be the case. We're a different mindset here, because in my mind, despite the times that I'm not feeling like role playing, I always am glad that I forced myself to take that first step, and I'm always happy. I'm always like, okay, that was a good call, and I trust in that for now.
It's kind of like there's a saying that with meditation, Everybody should meditate 20 times a day, or not 20 times a day, 20 minutes a day. And if you don't feel like meditating that day, you should do 40 minutes that day. Kind of like that. Like if you don't feel like doing role playing, those are the days where you should role play.
Yeah.
And, get together with your friends and spend time with them.
Totally. Honestly, there are many reasons I enjoy doing this. Besides the fact that role playing is fun, I love seeing the community. I love seeing you and Joe, and I like having an opportunity to step outside myself for a few hours and not think about whatever's going on in the world. And I think that alone has always been a good enough reason to continue stepping aside of myself.
Yeah, I agree. Now, also, I would say that there are things that I know that I can do to be more excited about the game. And a lot of the times where I'm most, I guess, despondent or don't want to play are the times where I haven't prepared or given it any thought. Like if I spend like, a couple hours like on a drive or, just, sitting at home when I don't have anything else to do. Like I know we're all busy, so it's hard to do, but especially if I'm GMing a game, like if I had just at least come out with an outline and I have done the thought process and have an idea, then it makes Wednesday nights much less stressful for me. Same if I have a good idea of my character, if I understand the system a decent amount, like it does help. So if you are the same way and you're constantly feeling like every time you go to play or run a game you just aren't there mentally, it might just be you need to allocate a little bit of time to think about it and run over.
It's true.
Ideas.
And these things are always, in my opinion, these hobbies, especially this one, is always good. It's always been very rewarding for me.
Yeah, likewise.
So great question, Bob. So how do you get in the mood sometimes? Honestly, at least in my case, I fake it till I make it. Which honestly is a pretty true thing. There's been many points in my life where I'm like, I'm gonna like this until I like it, and I end up liking it. Yeah. And Justin and I are friends. Just kidding. Bird of Nyx had the second part of her question. I don't know who it is. I think it's a her for some reason. No offense if you are not a her, but I'm going to call you a her. What is the opinion on pre-generated characters, as in characters who've been pre-generated for the players by the GM? Pre-generated PCs surprisingly often to fail for my players. I am pro pre-gens quite often, especially when I'm doing conventions, because I use them pretty
one-shots.
Yeah.
One-shots are fantastic.
We use pre-gens all the time. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all.
But I would say, like, if you're doing a 10-part campaign and the players are going to be connected to these characters, then I would say give them the option to create a character. Because if you're going to take the time to do 10 sessions, take the time to let them create their characters and customize them the way they want.
Definitely, yeah. And then finally, Colin asks, how do you cater to playstyles of new players? Like some who just want to rush through and kill everything and level up, no grasp on what it means to play a role-playing game. Not because they're trying to be a dick, but because they're just trying to play a game. Do I try to redirect their interest to roleplay and story, or do I let them do their thing? Good question. If they want to run around and kill everything, and you don't want that in your game, I think you need to talk to them and explain what the game is. The same way that if you sit down and play The Witcher, and you try to just hack and slash at everything, you're not going to get it. You don't really, or if you play Red Dead Redemption, you start shooting everything, you're going to die real quick. You need to have a certain skill level. Video games like this are more punishing because they're just going to be like, well, fuck you, game over.
Yeah, it's in the programming.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean you can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, I am all for punishing players for bad decisions. We talked earlier this week on the stream about flub rolls. And one of the things someone said, which was, I didn't bother commenting because it was basically my comment exactly, is I will always flub a roll, in my opinion. I will always flub a roll. Not always, but I'll flub a roll when there is where it's not the player's decision, that it's just bad luck. You know what I mean? If Justin's walking through very cautiously and he fucks a roll and he falls down a hill and into a spike and he's gonna die, you know, yeah, I'd probably be like, oh, it's half damage. It's not his fault. If he's being cocky and he's like jumping from thing to thing, or if I've warned him, it's like, okay, this is a very trap-laden area, and he's kind of being a jerk about it, and he falls down, yeah, he's gonna get full damage. He might get double damage, because the idea is RPGs are going to be punishing enough to players who don't respect them. And the easiest way to learn respect is to experience it. The same way that Justin and I don't pull out our phones when we're playing with somebody else, because we know how it feels. When you die in a game by making a shit action, you're going to be a lot more cautious the next time you play that game because of your experience. True. So personally, if you're okay with it, I don't think there's anything wrong with having dick players, so long as you're going to punish them accordingly for making bad decisions.
100%. Yeah, you need to sometimes it can be a conversation with the player, but yeah, if they're acting that way, like if you're trying to set up a game that has consequences and has real stakes, then sometimes that's what it is. And like maybe the player will come and talk to you afterwards and say like, what happened? Like I was having fun. And you're like, well, I mean, you ran in there, you were rash, and maybe that's when the conversation.
You can't punch the giant orc because the giant orc is like double your size and he's gonna hit you. That's a thing that Joe is very good at. You know, she'll be like, you're like, I punched the orc. She's like, okay, the orc punches you back and your skull fractured and you just died, and you're like, oh. I think she gets off on it, to be honest. I think she enjoys.
Well, I think in that point too, like she does give us outs though.
She does.
She like with I guess AL the other day, like when you wanted to attack that drow, like part of it was like
that was Chris. That was
Chris was oh right, yeah, okay.
That was Chris being like attack. You know that was Chris. I mean, so basically it was me, but it was like, you know, Chris.
We'd been taken prisoner and we were like in different rooms, and Harlan's character had a couple like of other prisoners there, and then found like a crossbow in the room, and he was going to use it to attack one of the drow. And then she was like, oh, okay, you do that? And then you were like, yeah, but then somehow the conversation kept going, and then you realized there were like 4 or 5 like armed drow in the room.
Yeah, because I like misunderstood that they were like sleeping.
Yeah, exactly. So,
meanwhile, like, Chris was there the entire time being like, do it.
So anyway, the point is you could do that. Like you could let the player like be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna run in, blah 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 blah, and you could say like, oh okay, well if you do that, then they smash you over the head with their club, and
you die.
You die. Oh, well if that's gonna happen, I'm not gonna do that. Oh, okay, so you're not gonna run into the room and do that. Okay, next time you do that, next time you say you're gonna do that, I'm gonna take you seriously.
Yeah, or just kill
them.
Like
you can just kill them. It depends on the player. It depends on how harsh. Like if they are enjoying the game, you don't want to punish their enthusiasm, but you might want to find a way to punish their stupidity.
Good way to put that, actually. And finally, the last question, which was ironically the first question of the night, I believe it was also from Colin. They asked how to make role-playing enjoyable for very shy players, especially hard if there are really confident, loud, thick-skinned players around in the same group. I work and play with a lot of shy players, so it comes up a lot. You know, shy players are very, very common. And honestly, I think it's a matter of including them in the sense of like turning to them and being like, what do you want to do here? And like, what do you see coming out of this scenario? Like, I don't know. I mean, Carly, you were a pretty shy player when we played. You hadn't, you weren't too loud. I think we were with some boisterous people. How did you feel? How did you feel overcoming that? V was also pretty shy in that group.
And did Harlan, Joe do anything that helped you? No,
I don't remember. I think so.
Oh my god!
I hope so.
Oh, shit, what did I say?
It'd be a bad example if I pulled out Carly, and then she was like, Harlan actually did a pretty terrible job at trying to include me. I'd be like,
Oh my god, no.
Whoops.
If like I'm wondering if there was anything. I have no doubt that you guys did everything in your power to encourage and help. So I'm wondering if there was anything that really spoke to you.
She said, "Oh, I was shy. I'm never loud." I think I tried to focus. He was super encouraging, she said.
Yeah, I have no doubt. And I think that probably played out in making eye contact and like specifically focusing the table on, or focusing
those
yourself.
Beautiful
it
blue
doesn't
eyes.
have to be the whole table.
On
Those
Carly's beautiful blues.
blue Carly eyes, and just lock in and say, "What do you want to do, Carly? What do you want,
Carly? What do you want to do? You just look in my eyes and you tell
And
me."
also, this might be a technique that might work, but saying their character name and like making it third person. So, what does Grinner want to do? What would Grinner do in this situation? That might help, like, them get into more of their analytical mind rather than thinking about the anxiety of the situation.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it comes down to like a bit of nerves, obviously. And I think as a GM you can encourage the players to speak more and be like, what do you want to do? And try to lower the tone. I mean, oftentimes we have this impression that we need to pick up shy people to match the level of the most boisterous, where it's a lot easier to lower the boisterous to the level of a shy person. You know what I mean? Don't expect more
definitely.
from the people who are being timid. Why don't you ask less of the people who are being boisterous? I think it'll be a lot better.
Great way of putting it. Yeah. That's like music. That's like, if you're trying to mix something, instead of turning up all of the
Turn everything else down.
quiet stuff, turn the big stuff down, baby.
Turn the big stuff down, baby.
You want me to turn the big stuff down?
Am I the big? You don't turn me down. Am I the big stuff in this scenario?
I ain't turning you down, big boy.
You better not.
That's not what I
That's
do.
what they call me, big boy.
Professor Big Boy.
Dr. Professor. Dr. Professor Big Boy.
Hello, I am Dr. Professor Dr. Dex Dalton.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Invictus RPG Academy Episode 3. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I just did a round of applause. Fuck. Lovely stuff. That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, this has always been a pleasure. My name, of course, has been Professor Harlan. If you are in the Toronto area, on the 12th, we are heading out to Bowmanville to do another Chronicle Brewing night. So please make sure you come out and join us. There's good drinks. Johnny's going to be there. I'm going to be there. Joe's going to be there. Justin's going to be there. Chris is probably going to be there. You'll get a hug. Probably. I shouldn't guarantee a hug, because it'll be entirely dependent on what I feel like,
and how many clothes you're wearing,
and how little clothes I'm wearing. But January 12th, come on out.
January 12th is a Saturday.
January 12th is a Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
Or,
and March
March
something is Breakout Con in Toronto.
Yeah.
A large role-playing and RPG, role-playing and board game, convention. It's huge.
Yeah.
I think many of you should fly in to see it.
Oh, yes. Fly, my pretties.
Because we'll all be there. It'll be in Toronto.
Yes.
It's a great convention. and we'll get to. It's our city, so we can like go out drinking one night. We can fucking hang out. In fact, I think this should be the big one. Okay, so this is March 15th to 17th in Toronto. I will link the thing here. If there were ever to be a convention that you came to, this would be a pretty good one. I mean, Fan Expo is the other big one in Toronto, but Breakout is role-playing and board game specific. It's small, but it's bigger than the one we did in Buffalo, but it's smaller than Fan Expo. So yeah. And friends of mine are organizing it, so. Carly said she was so close to almost being able to make it. Well,
The Breakout Con?
I don't know, but not close enough is all I know. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for seeing us tonight on the Invictus RPG Academy, episode 3. My name, as always, is Professor Harlan. This is Professor Justin Thomas James. And we hope you have a most wonderful, fantastical evening. So long, and until next time. Welcome back to the Invictus RPG Academy, episode 3.
Cheerio, I say.